Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is Face the Change in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. Chapter 16. Shikamaru didn't react at all when Sasuke made it back to the flat one evening after 3 days where he more or less vanished from everyone's sight, except the comatose patients at the hospital, but he hummed in approval as Sasuke got started on dinner. It was the least he could do, he supposed, to apologize for the disappearing act. Not that it was the first time, or the last. Sometimes it was just too much to be alive around others. But he had heard Shikamaru had been summoned to the Hokage Tower in the middle of the days, and it spelled, "Major Mission," loud and clear. Sasuke didn't want to be caught off guard. They didn't talk until dinner was all set up at the coffee table. Suna appointed Temari as their new Kazekage, Shikamaru said without preamble, eyes trained on his soup. That's good. That's good. He supposed it was. He knew Temari through Shikamaru mostly, but that was praise enough already. Any woman who could tolerate him had already proven her strength of character, and more than that, Shikamaru seemed rather taken with her, though there was no way to make him admit to it. She was very young, but what the older shinobi would perceive as a major flaw only made her more trustworthy in Sasuke's eyes. Her first decision was to call back all search parties after Gaara and the rest of the missing Jinchuriki. The second was to request Konoha's assistance in training their medical staff. She wants to stop looking? Sasuke asked, surprised. She must think they have more pressing matters to deal with. Or maybe she had decided to let it go. For now, at least. A sharp contrast to her father, who had spared no expense to find Suna's Jinchuriki, including trying to use the Akatsuki to his advantage. They had seen where that led them. Cool. That's cool. Yeah, I guess. Tsunade is sending Marco and Itaki as the medical staff. And me as liaison. Shikamaru might have requested the assignment. A first for him. Sasuke could only imagine the surprise on Tsunade's face, that the boy would volunteer for anything work-related. How long? I don't know. Some, I guess, if the medics need to be trained. Oh. Maybe it would be good for Itaka to get out of the village for a while. He got along well with Marco, he would be fine. And Shikamaru wanted to spend more time with the girl, Sasuke was sure. Still. I told the assignment desk to forward a part of my salary directly into the rent while I'm gone. But. Yeah, I might. I might move back home. For a while. After all, Sasuke had moved out largely to get away from his father. His father was as far as could be now. With Itaka gone to Suna, his mother would be alone at home, and even if she was bound to get awfully busy, it didn't mean she wouldn't suffer the loneliness too. And that he wouldn't. He didn't like the apartment when it was empty. If it comes to this, Ino has expressed interest in borrowing my room, Shikamaru added. Sakura will be interested in mine too, I guess. It had a certain appeal, to keep the flat and lend it to their friends, if they so needed. The money wasn't an issue, though there was no doubt the girls would want to pitch in anyway. They all spent a lot of time here, in this living room, on these couch and chairs. A haven away from their demanding families and clan responsibilities, from the conflicts with their parents and elders. Sasuke wasn't ready to let it go. When are you leaving? Not sure. Soon, once all the prep is done. Would you? Sasuke hesitated. It felt weird to ask, but no one needed to know. You'll keep an eye on Itaka, right? He's not doing so well, I think, and getting out of the village would do him good, but that didn't mean Sasuke liked it. He wanted his brother to stay close, was already getting anxious about having him so far away from his sight, out of reach. He would be powerless, if something happened to him there in Suna. Of course. I'll keep you posted, yeah? You know I'll write to you. It had started as a joke. The first time Shikamaru had gone to an out-of-the-village mission after they had moved in together, he had sent Sasuke 3 separate letters, despite being gone less than 2 weeks. So that Sasuke wouldn't miss me too much, he had said. A joke that had set up a habit. If they had to be gone more than a few days, they would write. Not to say anything in particular, nothing overly long and emotional. Just to know that they were thinking of each other. that they were coming home soon. Ino found it silly, but she complained for days if they didn't send her anything during their travels. She seldom wrote, but she brought back food and trinkets to gift them upon her return. Koji was similarly sentimental. He and Shikamaru even wrote to each other when they were both in the village, just because. Sakura had written a lot when she was gone too, though Suzuki couldn't often return her words, as she was on the move and often in secrecy, but he had kept each of them preciously. He also had a stack of unsent letters in his bedroom, gathering dust for lack of a destination to be sent to. They were almost a diary at this point. He figured they could serve as a tool for catching up one day. Here are all the things I wished you had been here to witness. Here are all the things you didn't live with me. He felt the strongest urge to get rid of them all now. He probably wouldn't. As for you, take care of Asuma for me. I am his doctor, you know. Yeah, so you keep saying. Their light chuckle quieted down after a few seconds and they settled in silence to eat. Suzuki could tell there was more his friend wanted to say though. Did something happen? Shikamaru asked, all casual, even if he had to know the answer already. That's... yeah. I guess. Suzuki didn't like to lie. But you won't tell, right? I don't want to. Shikamaru rolled his eyes and poked at Suzuki's cheek with his chopstick. Suzuki batted his hands away, annoyed. How is your mother then? His friend asked next, indulgent enough to change the subject without pressing. Shikamaru's concern was hard-learned, it didn't come naturally to him. He had to make an effort to show interest, so he never pressed too much, all too happy to drop it. Still, he made the effort. It was heartwarming. Overworked already. That's how it will be, from now on. She had been pleased to meet with Hinata, as predicted, though the encounter was brief, both busy with their own affairs. Hinata wasn't Suzuki's friend then, and Mikoto wasn't Suzuki's mother. It was jarring to see them play that game at each other, the poised clan leader, pleasant but sharp, unyielding. He had felt immature and childish by comparison. He didn't think he could do what Hinata did. Maybe he would have had no other choice but to manage, if there was no getting out of it. My mother. She apologized, he added. Shikamaru hummed, unsurprised. She didn't have to, Suzuki went on. She did the right thing, this is just how it had to be. Still, she said sorry. I didn't like it. He hated that she felt the need to, that she felt like she had wronged him somehow. I guess we should just expect less from other people, Shikamaru deadpanned, resigned. He said that, but he meant, from our parents. Suzuki's father was a good clan leader. Suzuki didn't agree with his stance, but he was. He listened to others, he made his decisions after careful consideration and consultation. He had the interest of the clan in mind first, at all times. He was also a good shinobi, a good fighter. Maybe even a good man. A good father though. What even was that? He wasn't bad to Ataki or Suzuki. Not outright, not on purpose. Maybe they did expect too much. Or maybe their parents were just bad at it. What did it change? They had tried, he was sure. They would keep trying. Sakura had seen Suzuki patch up horrific wounds gushing blood out. She had collected him after unending surgeries that left him on the brink of collapse but resulted in saving someone's limb, or organ, or life. She had also seen him in countless fights, level-headed and laser-focused, always 2 steps ahead, planning, strategizing, keeping an eye on everything and everyone around him. The point was, Suzuki did well under pressure and she had witnessed it firsthand many times. So it was incredibly funny how he morphed into an incoherent mess when Kurene's water broke on his shoes. Suzuki was panicking, Shikamaru was panicking as well. Asuma was faring a bit better, but not by much. Kurene was the only one who seemed aware that the world wasn't ending right there in the hospital lobby, which was a feat considering the pain she had to be in and the bunch of losers she was surrounded by. Sakura wasn't that deep into her comfort zone either, but at least she had enough of a mind to call a nurse and explain the situation, when it became clear that Suzuki was going to be of little help. The staff took over quickly, of course they were used to this. Sakura had never spared much time to think about it, but babies were born every day, right? Suzuki had most certainly dealt with this before too. She could only assume it was due to knowing Kurane so well, and probably because of Shikamaru too. These two's moods would bounce off each other like a tennis ball when they got into it. Kurane and Asuma were shuffled away, and they could only wait. It was weirdly therapeutic. Sakura had spent a lot of time waiting around in these halls, and her feelings had always been vastly different than what they were now. Terror and anxiety, dreadful anticipation. Waiting to know if her friends and teammates would make it, when, how. Nothing today but thrumming excitement, nervous energy that could go nowhere but echoing among her friends. There was nothing they could do and they didn't have to be there but. Kurane was having a child. A new human, breathing and alive, that wasn't there before but would be from now on. It was so weird, a bit surreal. Sakura had been around babies before, but it was hitting different now. Maybe because it was the first child of a shinobi she saw the birth of. Somehow, she had assumed this wasn't something for them to have. One of the nurses, a nice one who always pestered Sasuke about eating his meals on time, was kind enough to come to find them to tell them the baby was fine and Kurane was fine too. It was a girl, but they weren't sure about the name yet, and no, there would be no visit in the next few hours. There was no point lingering, so if they would please fuck off of her service and free the space. She allowed them one sneak peek, just so that they could wave at a drowsy Kurane from the doorframe and get a glimpse at the baby. They all reconvened to Shikamaru and Sasuke's place since it felt weird to just go their separate ways when Kurane and Asuma had a baby. Healthy but so very small. Sakura had a hard time conceiving anyone ever being so small. They made that, Ino whispered before taking another sip of her drink. They all nodded, a bit dazed. Sakura could barely fathom it. An entirely new person, brought into the world just like that. She had never given much thought to having children. It didn't sound very appealing to her, especially the hard process of going through pregnancy or giving birth. It seemed such a strange, foreign idea, something for other people, something that didn't concern them at all. This wasn't their life. Yet Kurane was a shinobi too, a good one. Sakura liked and respected her. She was well liked and well respected in general, by everyone. She was a good fighter, a good teacher. And now she would have to be a good parent, Sakura supposed. Asuma too. Kurane maybe wouldn't even stop being a shinobi, like so many women did. Asuma wouldn't go back to active duty, he would never take on a mission again. She wondered if he could content himself with that. Either way, they had a child. They ate together, discussing the baby, the family, the future. Most of them were quite confused over the prospect, some more than others. Some clearly against it, others not so sure. Being in love seemed hard enough already. And that was without accounting for the fact that Sakura had only ever kissed girls and she didn't really see that changing anytime soon. "What about you, Sasuke?" Ino asked loudly, for the boy was lost in thought and far out of the conversation for several minutes now. He blinked back into the present, a little confused. "What about me? You know. Love, marriage, kids. All that." If anything, his confusion only increased. He shrugged. "I don't know. I never really thought about it." Sakura didn't doubt that. She had this theory. She had it for a while now, years really, but she had never broached the subject with him because it seemed silly, before. And now, downright cruel. Sasuke had never expressed interest in anyone, girl or boy, had never returned any advance, confessed to any crush. She had seen him blush a little at a cute boy or two, but it didn't seem to prompt anything in him. It could have been that it simply wasn't something he would ever be interested in. But Sakura had this theory. There was one boy Sasuke would always look at. Always run to. When they were kids, she would be jealous of it at times. Not even because she wished for his attention. It just felt like Naruto would always come first, and Sasuke didn't seem to be even aware of it. She had never brought it up then, and there was no way she would now. There only laid heartbreak, not that Sasuke had not been heartbroken already. He didn't like her being angry with Naruto, so she kept that to herself too. In the long list of Naruto's fault, the pain Sasuke had gone and would still go through because of him was at the very top. At the end of the day, Sakura could go on, if they lost him. But Sasuke? She didn't think he could ever let go. She resented Naruto for being unaware of his power. Surely he would have been more gentle with it, if he knew. Can you imagine us with kids? Ino said, split between disgust and envy. Sakura couldn't, not really. Her mother would say, "It will come, you'll see." She wasn't in a hurry. "I'll be leaving for Kiri soon," Tsunade said as soon as Sasuke and Sakura arrived at her office. Terumi May has been extending invitations for a while now. She is open to some alliance. We can't pass it up. She was summoning teams and active shinobi one after the others, Shikamaru to Suna, a part of the Yamanaka clan, and Anko's team gathering intelligence. Things were moving fast. If she was telling them, she had already settled it with her commandment. It couldn't have been easy. With Fugaku's death, they had rethought the priorities of their missions, to limit outside ventures that weren't essential or couldn't be staffed properly. Is that wise? Sakura asked, voicing Sasuke's doubts. Maybe not. But the situation is not dire enough that we have to retreat behind our walls just yet. If we are lending support and resources, I want to follow through in person. Okay. They shifted on their feet, uncomfortable. These kinds of political considerations were still high above their heads. It wasn't like their opinion would be heard on the matter. You've been shadowing me for a while, Sasuke. I want you to come this time too, Tsunade said. Sasuke flushed lightly, pleased. That would be an honor. Thank you. What about me? I thought you would be up for it, Sakura. You've been asking for more outside missions. Besides, Jiraiya will join us in Kiri. And? Tsunade looked between the two of them, strangely hesitant. I don't know. I figured you'd be happy to go together. So that you wouldn't get lonely or something. They both gaped at her with matching confusion and embarrassment. Was she trying to be nice? They weren't kids though. They didn't need to, bring a friend, like a family vacation? This was mortifying. Is there a problem? He couldn't tell if she was genuinely unaware, or had caught on to the awkward vibes but refused to acknowledge it. She was good at shutting down comments just by implying there should be none to make. He hated when she did that. No problem, Sakura said, a bit dumbfounded. Thank you for this opportunity, Hokage-sama. Yeah. We'll leave in a few days. The Inuzuka are coming, and Anko's team is there already. Anyway. Be ready. You're dismissed. They bowed awkwardly and found themselves back in front of the Hokage Tower, slightly off-settled by the whole affair. That was, Sakura tried. Yeah. Is she bringing me as your travel companion? Sasuke winced. That sounded a lot like that. I'm sorry. She means well. I think. He feared she would take offense, get upset. But to his surprise, Sakura only laughed. Oh, it's fine by me. I did want to get out of the village a bit. Being friends with you is finally paying off. Don't say that. Come on, it's true. You're totally her favorite. I'm gonna start currying favors to you, be warned. Stop it, stop. She laughed again, relishing in his embarrassment. It's gonna be cool. You've never been to Kiri, right? You have. With Jiraiya. We passed there a few times, though we were never super welcome, so we didn't linger. They have trees and plants growing everywhere, even worse than here. Some buildings are actually built around trees, or in them. I don't know, I liked it there, despite the lack of hospitality. She was rambling, happy to be on the road again soon. It wasn't even about Naruto, or not only. Traveling was a way of collecting information and trying to catch his trail, but she had acquired a genuine taste for it. Whereas Sasuke. What is it? He jumped, realizing that she had stopped in front of the Okonomiyaki restaurant, and stopped talking too. She looked at him pointedly, making it clear he wouldn't get away without spilling. He didn't even try to say it was nothing. Well. The last few times I traveled out, it didn't go too well. That was an understatement if he ever said one. He didn't particularly like it, even when it went well. He didn't like having to bother with where to eat and sleep, with unfamiliar places and people. He liked his life in the village, his work, his friends, his dumb bed. He didn't feel safe outside, remained restless and on edge because they couldn't relax out there, they couldn't just take a break from it all, like he so often needed to. You still have to go though. It goes with the job, you know. She remained terrible at comforting him, she was pretty much telling him to suck it up because it wasn't like he would be able to avoid it anyway. Now, but especially later. If he took Tsunade's place. It was her way of being thoughtful though. At any rate, she was right. Besides, it doesn't have to go wrong, you know. I'm sure it'll be fine. Somehow she didn't sound very convinced. Is it a good idea to leave the village? Jiraiya asked. It was the 5th time that day. Not that he asked, but that someone did. Shikaku, twice, Tsum, Shizun, thrice, make it 6 then. Tsunade sighed but didn't look away from the landscape she had been lost in for the last few minutes. The Hokage monument was in the tower's back, so she couldn't see it when she was in her office. It was for the best, especially now that her face was carved up there too, she would have gone crazy having to watch it every day. Instead, she gazed at the village, laid at the tower's feet. They had built more and more buildings over the years and soon they would have to think about going beyond the walls, or up the cliffs. That was, if they remained at peace. The population was growing now, but there was no guarantee it would last. One of us has to, she said after a long enough silence that she guessed her friend was expecting a real answer. One of the cage needed to make the trip, if only for the gesture. It wasn't by staying barricaded behind their high walls that they would get anything done by way of rallying forces and getting something done about a bunch of assholes that were managing to wreak havoc across the countries unstopped and unchallenged. It was honestly mortifying, no matter how strong they were. The Akatsuki was, 20 people in a shady network? The horror. But they were all happily burying their head in the sand and looking the other way, convincing themselves that someone else would deal with a problem that didn't really concern them anyway. It was Suna's problem if they had their cage aced off in the quest for their Jinchuriki, right? And now it was Konoha's problem if one of its clan leaders and strongest shinobi had been killed. Just like it would Kumo's or Kiri's problem when they faced a large-scale attack in the quest for their Jinchuriki, and then. This was ridiculous. They had more than enough resources, between all of them, to deal with this threat. But it was more pleasant talking to a wall than trying to deal with the other cage, at least the wall wasn't capable of condescension. Terumime was another matter. She was more reasonable, and most importantly, more vulnerable, both her village and her position in it. So she was more agreeable to an alliance, recognizing she didn't have much of a choice, if she wanted to survive and protect her people. And well, Mei was a woman. That put her leagues above their other counterparts. Suna's new Kaze cage was barely a woman, with how young she was, but there was hope there too. Be careful then, Jiraiya added, quite lame. At least he wasn't going to try and talk her out of it like the others had. She didn't want to fall into the trap of thinking herself above needing the opinions and advice of anyone, but they seemed to forget she wasn't actually a teenager playing at the big boss here. She was twice older than most of them, and not yet senile. She wasn't acting rashly. Why won't you come with us? I need to go to AIM first. She spun around to look at him this time, as this was news to her, and strange news at that. Why? There have been strange rumors coming from Rain Country, but it's as if no one ever comes out of it, or goes in for that matter. Hanzo won't meet you so easily. I won't meet him. I won't let him know I'm here. He is busy handling a civil war, from what I gathered. He'll have more pressing matters to deal with than me. It made sense not to bother with the politics of it if all he wanted was to gather information. They both knew it was more than that though. They both remembered Hanzo clearly. It would always remain fresh and unaltered in their mind, the burning humiliation of defeat, the genuine fear for their lives as he so easily dominated them. They had changed since then, and the man was old. Still, Tsunade would rather never meet with him again. She would rather never set foot to AIM again, period. Though she had an idea why Jiraiya would. Do you think they're even alive? If they are, they could have left. He faked surprise at first, as if he could convince her he didn't know who she was talking about. He dropped it quickly enough at her disabused expression. I'm sure I would have heard about them if they had. They would have made a name for themselves. Ames' closed borders and mysterious activities were the only reasons he could cling to the hope that the 3 kids he had randomly decided to take under his wings and train, all those years ago, would have made it after he was gone. She had been so angry at him then, that he would still do what he wanted regardless of the consequences even in these circumstances, even in the aftermath of a devastating and frankly pointless war that had left them weakened and vulnerable. They were needed back at home, and here he was, claiming he would stay to babysit orphan kids that had next to no chance of making it to the next week. She understood now that it was his way of coping. That if he could help them, he could make sense of his own involvement, he could forgive himself maybe. She had thrown herself into her medicine study in her relentless and ultimately pointless quest to improve Konoha's hospital, and Orochimaru had disappeared into his research. All of them, they were trying to do something good, something meaningful. All of them, they were trying to get redeemed. They had failed, obviously. Nothing could absolve them of their crimes. Maybe that was why it had turned so awfully for them. Maybe it was retribution. Be careful then, she echoed. And meet us back in Kiri. We will need you there. I will need you there, she meant, though she knew it would work against her, again. Jiraiya couldn't help her, couldn't support her. He was still trying to make amends, still chasing his mistakes. The future didn't exist for him, it wasn't something that needed tending to. If I fix this, if I fix that, and then before they knew it 12 years had passed and he hadn't been home once. She was sure his link to Naruto was something on his list as well, that he would get to at some point. He didn't get that most people weren't waiting around for him to fix what he had messed up or simply left unattended. People got by, they moved on. These kids, if they were alive, would they even want to see him? She was too indulgent anyway. He would do whatever he wanted. As long as he came back. They received the news deep into the preparation for the trip to Kiri. Sasuke was in the Hokage office, sorting through dull paperwork while Tsunade made origami animals out of some of the correspondence with Kumo and IWA. He should have said something, but he understood the sentiment, and some of the exchanges clearly didn't need to be archived for posterity. Yamanaka Inoichi brought the message himself, which already spoke of its importance. Ino was trailing behind him and it was the look she threw at Sasuke that finished convincing him that he should pay attention, even if his stomach was churning. Short as the missive was, Tsunade stayed focused on it for a long time, exchanging loaded gazes with Inoichi. Shikaku arrived at that moment, no doubt warned by his friend. A little out of breath. Suddenly, Sasuke wasn't sure he wanted to know. What is it? Shikaku asked. What happened? We received an urgent message from Anko's team, Inoichi answered, gesturing at the paper crumpling more and more under Tsunade's tense grip. There was an attack, in Kiri, she said, words careful and dispassionate. They suffered a few casualties, some buildings were destroyed. Uchiha Izumi was hurt. The Akatsuki. Inoichi's expression tightened some more. Tsunade glanced at Sasuke, only briefly, but enough to be caught, enough that he understood at once what she was going to say next. The Jinhyuriki? The mist fell before they made it to Kirigakure. Thick, opaque, intimidating in that it seemed almost physical, like they were going to be rejected by it, like it could suffocate them if they marched on. They didn't have much of a choice though, and one of Tsume's dogs came back from reconnaissance assuring it was safe. Shikamaru longed for the sun already, hated the cold press of the mist against his skin. It turned out it wasn't just due to shitty weather though, as they were intercepted just a few minutes into the fog by 2 ninjas from Kiri. Who are you, and what is your purpose here? The older one demanded, though he wasn't that old. A few years older than Shikamaru maybe, and trying hard to look stern. The girl by his side had a similar face, a sister probably, and probably a genin. She was half hiding behind his back. We are from Konoha, Tsunade said, though her headband was a big enough clue. We have come to help. The surprise on their face was both comical and slightly offending, as the boy eyed their party with a suspicious glare. They had rearranged the teams hastily, the one ready to leave for Suno was tasked to follow Tsunade to Kiri instead. Some of the original delegations were still coming, the Inyazuka family, some Chunin, while the rest had to stay in Konoha. Namely, Sasuke and Sakura. Tsunade had been inflexible. They would not come to Kiri with her. Sasuke was to finish the preparation they were supposed to do, and would join her later, upon the original schedule. It was the first time Shikamaru truly thought Sasuke could fight her on one of her decisions. But in the end, he was the one to talk Sakura down from arguing. She had looked so betrayed, that he would pass up a chance to cross paths with their missing friend. But above all, Sasuke wanted to avoid fighting him again. And meeting him? Maybe that too. Sasuke was tight-lipped over what was bothering him lately, besides the obvious, but there was a clear shift in his position regarding Naruto and his whereabouts. The shift being that Sasuke had decided it no longer concerned him. He was going to have a fun time explaining that one to Sakura. Shikamaru didn't regret missing that. He did regret having to go so soon after the birth of Kurane and Asuma's child, but what could he miss in a few weeks? Babies didn't grow up that fast, did they? That's. I need to report this, the Kirinin said, fumbling. Wait a moment please. Don't move. They were lucky Tsunade was in a forgiving mood, as she didn't take offense at their treatment of her. Chances were they didn't even recognize her, it would come back to haunt them later. Shikamaru waited for one of them to vanish back to their commandment to get the information and receive orders, but instead the girl signed something into the air. Ah, not the air, the mist, flowing and swirling around her finger. She closed her hand in a seal, the message dispersed. It had to be how they had been detected so quickly too, this mist was nothing natural. Just a moment later it contorted again in a complicated series of signs they couldn't decipher, a secret code no doubt, to keep their communication under wrap. Do you have any medicnin? The boy asked, losing his nervousness by the minute. Tsunade nodded, pointing at Itaki and Marco behind her. Then please follow my sister. We are in dire need. As for the others. The situation has settled down now, but Mizukage-sama said that any help was welcome. She also said that the blonde woman with huge. He abruptly cut himself off as he couldn't help looking down, briefly, at the most obvious huge thing Tsunade had. She raised an eyebrow at him. The boy seemed close to fainting. She is expecting you. I'll lead you to her. Thank you. The two medics cut away from the group to follow the younger girl. They didn't look back, didn't ask for any further information. This was where they would be used best after all. And Itaki must have been anxious to see Izumi. Shikamaru almost followed, he had promised he would keep an eye on him. But he had his own duty to fulfill, and the message assured Izumi was fine. She would be the one to comfort her friend, he was sure. How many attackers? Some asked as they ran through the dense forest, that was opening up more and more as buildings started to appear around them, scattered among and up in the trees. 6. The Kirinin glared at Kiba in his incredulous tone, but could he be blamed? 6, against a whole village? Then again, it had only taken 2, in Suna. They're gone now, the boy said through gritted teeth as they reached a more densely built area of the village. The mist prevented them from seeing anything and set him on edge. It was as suffocating and nerve-wracking as being trapped in a space too small, with how little they could see, with how it filled all the air around them. It was its advantage too, he supposed. The enemy would have a harder time coordinating this way. But wouldn't the Kirinin struggle as well? Maybe they had contingencies for this type of situation, or it wouldn't make for a very effective strategic tool. There was a low crash followed by rising screams, the ground shaking under their feet. The ominous cracking and rumbling of a building collapse. "Some," Tsunade called. She didn't need to say more. The woman gestured to Kiba and Hana, and they cut away from the group to lend assistance. The rest of the party followed the Kirinin to the imposing building at the center of the village Shikamaru assumed to be the administration and Kage's headquarters. They found the Mizukage up there on the tower. She was watching over the village. No, she couldn't see a thing with that mist, could she? She could. Because the mist was hers. The messages were hers too, though the Jounin around her were receiving and sending them as well. Updates from all over the village, if Shikamaru had to guess. A quick and efficient way of communicating across Kiri. We didn't find any traps or seals left behind, a man announced by the woman's side. but the prison is still not secured. There is some resistance. She nodded but didn't break concentration over the jutsu she was maintaining. That mist had to be all-consuming. Mizukage-sama. I brought the people from Konoha to you. You'll have to forgive me, Tsunade, my dear. I'm rather busy and can't welcome you properly to my village right now. She was grinning, feral, as sweat rolled on her forehead and down her neck, the strain of maintaining the mist taking its toll. Tanjitsu, I hope you treated the Godame Hokage of Konoha with the respect she deserved, she said to the boy that had accompanied them. His face blanched, as white as his hair with horror as he understood what she was saying. At a loss on how to make up for his blunder, he chose to vanish in a shunshin, probably deciding that he was better off lifting concrete right then. Served him right. 6 of them, huh? 6 came. 8 left. Who? What do you think? The Rokubai and the Sanbai are gone. The tailed beasts of Kiri. It was kind of a huge deal for the woman to admit so openly that they did, in fact, possess the 2 Biju, as Kiri had always denied having stolen the Sanbai from Uzushio. Shikamaru had made his research. Suzuki was adamant. Sakura had grilled Jiraiya about it often enough too. This confirmed so much already. Why the Jinhyuriki had come. That Kiri had retained hold of 2 of them after all, not 1. And that they had failed to stop them. How did they find them? Do you think I'm going to tell you? Tsunade frowned, displeased. The other woman laughed. Relax, no need to make that face. I can't tell you because I don't know. That little shit of Utakata does what he wants, for all I know he's the one who invited them here. As for the Sanbai, I never knew. Whoever had a hold on them must not like me very much. They never made a move to return them to me. And they are still causing trouble now. Shikamaru was impressed by her calm and detachment. It was partly faked no doubt, but that was still jarring. They could hear the screams from there, to lift some rubbish, to free the ones trapped under. They could hear their screams too. A man with blue hair appeared by her side, gave a brief nod. With a sigh, she let her arms fall. The jutsu faded. The mist was less dense already. Sorry, it seems like you hurried here for nothing, and that today won't be the day I impress you with my skills. The situation is under control. Make yourself useful tending to the wounded. Is that an order, Mizukage-sama? Tsunade asked. Inexplicably, they seemed to be enjoying this. You wanted us to be allies, didn't you? The Mizukage shot back. But then as she read another message above Tsunade's shoulders, code dancing in the mist before dissipating, her lips tightened and she was more serious than she had been since their arrival when she added, please. You're going to owe me, Tsunade said casually, as if this was no big deal. Shikamaru thought she wouldn't want them to get involved too much. It would be the smart thing to do, to observe for now, not to put too much in. But now that they were here, it was obvious she didn't intend to hold back. Shikamaru understood what Suzuki saw in her, why he had such a high opinion of her and her commandment. He decided to go make himself useful at the hospital. With how much he hung out with Suzuki while he studied and worked, he had picked up a few things. Plus Suzuki insisted they all be as knowledgeable as possible, just in case. Most of the wounded had not even been in a fight, rather, they had been injured by the collapse of one building or another, as the intruders made their escape. Among the shinobi, a few had died, though the Mizukage had been strangely hesitant to say how much. Not as in she didn't want to, but as in she wasn't sure. Which was weird, as it shouldn't have been hard to account for the shinobi on duty and missing. Unless some were not where they were supposed to be. He was speculating, but the woman had admitted openly that she wasn't aware of the location of the second Jinhyuriki up until now. Shikamaru doubted it was a lie. Both were lost to the village now, she had better be straightforward. Shikamaru wandered the hall of the main building, hastily turned into an emergency room. Despite himself, he looked for Itaki among the crowd. His instinct was right. It was weird to know the man so well when he had interacted with him so little. Suzuki worried about his brother a lot. Shikamaru found him on his knees by a cot where Uchiha Izumi was sitting, looking a little worse for wear but healthy enough. She was holding Itaki's head as he rested his forehead on her lap. He was breathing heavily, most likely coming down from a fit of panic. "I'm fine," she kept saying. "I'm fine." She was trying to calm him down, and Shikamaru wasn't sure from what high. The man's hands were tightly closed on the sheets, he was tensed as a bowstring, ready to snap. There was a wisp of urgency in the girl's soothing voice. She managed, eventually. He uncoiled just a bit, he let go of the tormented sheets. Marco appeared by his side, face half hidden by his hair as usual, expression inscrutable. "Itake," he said, toneless. Itake got whatever it meant though. He got up and followed the other medicnen without another word, back to their duty, as they were sorely needed. Izumi watched them go with a troubled expression, and Shikamaru waited for her to compose herself a little before he approached her. "All good?" he asked, a little lame. He never knew how to address women, especially ones who were older, higher ranked, and stronger than him. He knew Izumi both as Sasuke's protective almost sister and the strict Chunin instructor that kicked his ass during missions if he didn't give it his all. Sometimes he was convinced she hated him, despite Sasuke assuring him it was all in his head. "I've had worse. I'm just sore." He doubted being just sore would have warranted the large bandages compressing her torso and shoulder. He kept that observation to himself though. "Can you tell me what happened? Are you sending your report to Sasuke as soon as I'm done?" She sounded playful but a little weary too. He elected not to lie. "Yeah?" he asked. "It's better than him being here." "Can't imagine that going well." "That bad, huh? What happened?" "Not sure. It was pretty chaotic. Some alarms went off early this morning, signaling intruders. The whole village went on high alert but nothing happened at first. And then one of their building just blew up. Straight up blown from within, it's a pile of rubbish now. It was supposedly some boring archive storage, but Anko thinks it was actually a secret prison of some kind." "Did you see Naruto?" She grabbed at her injured shoulder, expression sour. "I did." "He did this to you?" "I don't think he recognized me. Or anyone. He was enraged. Oozing chakra everywhere, and his friends were no better. They wreaked havoc from there to the village's edge, with not much resistance. They made quite the mess. There were a lot of civilians around them. The Jinhuriki might not have targeted people, but they had done a lot of damage in their escape. Was it on purpose? It would have been smarter and easier to leave in secret, as they had come, so why? They left with a child, Izumi said, as if hearing the questions swirling in his head. "What child?" "I don't know." The Kirinin said they didn't know either. "I can take a guess though. As for the Sanbai, I never knew. Was it the truth? Could it be that the Sanbai was kept right in the heart of the village, and the Mizu cage never knew?" Unwittingly, Shikamaru thought of the cage. Sasuke had snuck down the administrative prison one day, determined to make sense of some of Naruto's cryptic words. Naruto had disappeared for days back then. If the village had wanted it, wouldn't they have been able to keep him hidden for good? The Hokage knew then, but what about Sai, and Shino's cousin, and all the ones rescued from the route after Danzo's arrest? How old? She bit her lip, looked down. He thought she was hesitating or embarrassed, but it was anger that tensed her shoulders, tightened her fists. "I'd say around 8 years old. That would do it. They could have left undetected. Even in plain sight, who could have stopped then? But maybe they didn't want to go quietly. Or couldn't. How many casualties here?" "About 30. Shinobi and civilians alike, crushed under some walls. Some fights also broke out between Kirinin. The ones guarding the prison, the prisoners freed in the chaos. All in all, it was a mess. That was really bad. For these people and their families, for future diplomacy, for the status of the Jinhuriki, for everyone. All Shikamaru could think about was how he was going to tell that to Sasuke. They skipped the official report. There was no point fighting for the higher UPS to include at least one of them in the meeting, when they could rely on Shikamaru's own retelling of the situation in Kiri. The message got to Ino first. She was the one to receive underhand communication when the need arose. She insisted on reading it aloud. Sasuke fought hard against himself not to rip it out of her hands. He forced himself to settle at Sakura's feet as she sat on his couch. He rested his head against her legs, she laid a heavy hand in his hair. They couldn't prepare much more for the upcoming news. Shikamaru was concise and factual. He wrote about the events as he understood them, the timing, the gray areas, the hearsay. It painted a clear enough picture. The Jinhuriki had come, maybe seeking one of them out. They had left with two and with destruction in their wake. More than 30 deaths, a few buildings toppled. The villages enraged. Shikamaru's letter concluded on news from Kumo, who had fended off an attempt from the Akatsuki to take away their last Jinhuriki at the same time. The Raikage was calling for a summit. To deal with both threats once and for all. Sasuke closed his eyes, though it did nothing to help escape his friend's commentary and speculations. What would the villages decide? Which one would they want to tackle first? Was Naruto a wanted criminal now, in addition to a wanted receptacle? They had kept quiet and discreet for 2.5 years. Even their rescue of Gaara, even their mingling in the fight against Haiden and Kakuza were quick strikes, out of necessity. But this? This was the rage the villages should have feared from the start. The one Sasuke had hoped they wouldn't let loose, because it would bring retaliation now. It would bring war. It wasn't unexpected. Was maybe inevitable even. Naruto didn't do things by halves. He had made his goal clear. Did it have to go this way though? Did he have to kill? Sasuke couldn't even tell if he was met on behalf of those people, or simply because it was such a poor move on Naruto's part, it made things so much harder. Was it terrible of him to think this way? He didn't want Naruto to be a killer. Did he care about those killed though? Naruto had asked more than once, why they cared so much about their own people's lives when they were so dismissive of outsiders. Wasn't he the same though? For the sake of his own, he had gone that far. Far enough that the villages would have no choice but to react instead of ignoring it all and keeping their head buried in the sand as they had until now. Too far, maybe, to come back from it. Was that how it ended? A small party is to join the Godame on the way to the Land of Iron and the summit. Sasuke, Sakura, you'll go to her, Ino concluded before rolling back the scroll. So be it. So be it. Chapter 17. Gaara woke up slowly from a few hours of peaceful sleep. It never failed to amaze him, even after all these years. He still remembered the first time, when he had been back to the golden cage of his room in the Kazekage's residence, after the Konoha-Chunin exam that had reset the course of his life. He had spent the trip back in complete silence, not that anyone had tried to ask him anything, though Temari had looked like she wanted to, at times. All his life, she had looked like this, on the verge of saying something but never daring to. Back in his room, he had been restless and terrified, to go back to this life after knowing another, to waste away in this room when Naruto was out there, suffering his own misfortunes that Gaara couldn't alleviate no matter how hard he wished to. That had been a new feeling as well, to care for another, to hope they would be happy and safe. He remembered laying down for a few minutes of rest, as he had trained himself to do ever since he had understood that sleeping meant surrendering his body to the beast. He remembered waking up to a different light in the room, to a different time of the day. The panic, the terror, and then the awestruck disbelief. Nothing had happened. He had slept at will, and nothing had happened. He had slept an awful lot in the next few years. It helped pass the time, dull the pain, fight the loneliness. He had slept, waiting. Now he slept closer to what would be considered a normal amount, although the others often joked about his sleeping habits, erratic at best. He had been trying to stick to a more reasonable schedule though, as Neji kept strict hours that weren't to be disturbed. And Gaara liked to sleep with him. He liked to hear the steady breath of the other boy nearby, feel the warmth of his skin. They wouldn't touch, wouldn't even lay that close, but so little a space was a minor revolution already, for Gaara who had been destined to live this life bare of contact, warmth, love. Here and now, he had plenty of all. It was still hard to believe sometimes. The sky was barely graying above the forest surrounding the temple, dawn was still a few hours away, and thus Neji's return to the world of the living would wait as well. As much as he enjoyed sleeping, Gaara had yet to understand the appeal of lounging around in bed once awake, as Karen or Naruto were prone to do. He got up swiftly and exited the bedroom without a sound. He wasn't the only one to keep weird hours at the temple, and so he often crossed paths with one resident or another no matter the time. Some stayed up very late, some woke up very early. Some seldom slept at all, old habits hard to shake off despite being safe enough here, under the protection of the foxes and their strange fondness for Naruto's allegiance, and their appetite for his chakra. He found Yujito meditating on the porch outside and settled quietly by her side. This was the bulk of their relationship, sharing the silence of the earliest hours of the day. Neither of them was much for talking, and the others did more than enough for them. The reprieve was welcome. Gaara was still unused to living with others. In the more domestic sense of the word, as he had never truly lived alone either, but, these were times better left unthought of. He slipped easily into a meditative state, into the vast expanse of desert that inhabited his mind. It was rare to run into the Ichibai these days. She had let go of some of her anger regarding Naruto's tampering with their seal, but she still wouldn't talk to him often. The years he had spent locked up in Suna, he had been resentful in turn, as she had punished him by deserting his mind entirely, in a time when he was going mad with loneliness. She suffered it too though, he knew, and so when Naruto had found them again, when they had been able to rejoin within themselves and let the beasts to their own world, she had settled down, had come back to him. An unspoken relief, he had missed her in his life, despite everything. In all the torments she had inflicted him, she had been the one he knew best, the one he spoke to the most, the one he could rely on to be there, if only for his suffering. He couldn't say the same for anyone else in his life, before he had met Naruto. So she roamed the desert. Or the forest or the swamp, this landscape was ever-changing, suited to each according to their preferences. To Gaara, of course, the endless plains of the desert, swept with wind and stifling with heat. He missed the heat dearly. He caught Yujito's presence at the edge of his consciousness. She was conversing with the Nibi, she got along well with the prickly cat. Their relationship was confusing, to say the least, but then again, she was older than he was, and she had not been raised the same. They each had their history. The others were only a suggestion in his mind, mostly asleep as their host were. It was reassuring still to feel them close, to know they could be reached easily. This relief was Shukaku's, not his, as much as she would deny it. They grew stronger and calmer too, the closer they were to each other. The Kyuubi and Nanabi, and now the Hanbai and the Goba too, and there, another. Shukaku was by his side in an instant. She was the sand of the desert, she was this whole place at once. She couldn't touch him though, not anymore. The bars were there, though they couldn't see them, changing and swirling like the sand in the wind. She could no longer invade his mind. She didn't have to, for him to hear her. 3. There at the edge of the desert, where the landscape blurred into a humid forest, there stood a child. Younger than 10, pale but smiling at nothing in particular, they didn't seem to notice Gaara and Shukaku watching them as they talked to themselves, carefree. That was 1 second, the next, the child was replaced by a young man with violet eyes, face cut in half by a vertical scar. He stared at Gaara, eyes hard but pleading. Then it was a girl with purple marks on her face, a messy bob cut in a distressed expression. "Help us." The child kept on playing. The man and the girl kept on begging. Above the forest loomed the massive shadow of a three-tailed turtle. "Help us." The next moment, they were gone. "Did you recognize anything?" Yujito asked Gaara. She was the first to break the stunned silence that had followed his retelling of the night's event, what he had seen during his meditation. Yujito, always the pragmatic one, was already thinking about what to make of it. "I believe it was the forest of Kiri." "It would make sense," Karen said. "If the Sanbai is hidden anywhere, it's there." "But why didn't it manifest while we were there then?" Suijitsu asked, already anticipating that they would need to go back. The first time had been hard enough on him. Not because he didn't want to go back, but because he did, and couldn't. He had no way to know how he would be received. He longed for his home place despite how terribly it had treated him and his own. Naruto could relate. Maybe they couldn't. "But I felt them there," Gaara said, looking upset, regretful. Yotakata didn't know anything about it either, so they must have been hidden well, Suijutsu added, clumsily trying to make Gaara feel better. Naruto could also feel his distress. Gaara had sensed their fellow Jinchuriki's presence in Kiri, but he had failed to pinpoint them properly, and they had left unknowing. Naruto moved to take his hand, squeezed twice. There was nothing to feel guilty for. They did what they could. The man you saw, did he look like this? Suijutsu held up a rather well-done drawing of a face with a scar and an asymmetrical haircut, sketched hastily on the back of a seal. Gaara nodded. That's the previous host of the Sanbai. He's been dead for years though. Isn't that the fourth Mizukage? Roshi asked, distaste obvious in his voice. Suijutsu shrugged, holding back a retort. He was prickly about anything concerning his village, defending it fiercely despite its shortcomings. So the girl and the child must be hosts as well, Yujito cut in to close the subject. Maybe they're dead too. We don't even know if the Sanbai is sealed in now. They had disappeared with the death of the previous Mizukage, but everyone assumed Kiri had kept the Sanbai secret within its walls. It would be awfully risky to go to Kiri now, Roshi pointed out, though his tone wasn't exactly disapproving. How could it be? It wasn't as if they had a choice. You can't get caught, Karen said gravely. They were used to her being the voice of doom, but she repeated, somber, you can't get caught. Had it been up to her, they wouldn't have gone at all. The villages would be enraged enough if they brought yet another Jinchuriki into their ranks. They wouldn't stay idle much longer, and they wouldn't be kind to the ones they got their hands on. On the horizon loomed the threat of an alliance between the hidden villages and the Akatsuki. Suna would never, after what happened to the fourth Kazekage, but the others? Kumo, Kiri? What wouldn't they do to stop the Jinchuriki and bring them back under their thumb? I will try to reach them again, Gaara assured with sharp determination. He was agitated, restless. They were always close. 3-1. There was some measure of envy in the Kyuubi's tone. I am not envious. Shikako said she might be able to find them. It was always strange to hear Gaara refer to his Biju by her name. Who's envious now? They made plans. Yujito would go in Gaara's stead, as it was too risky for him to go back to Kiri where he might have been spotted already. Naruto had to take them. Karen didn't let him go out alone these days. Suijutsu's help would be needed, and loath that they were to bring out a third Jinchuriki, they decided they needed the extra hand. Han offered, surprisingly, and to his friend's clear distaste. They would leave the next day. Naruto followed Gaara out of the temple and down the river when the group broke apart and went back to their various occupations. Karen eyed him with clear warning as he stepped out. He would be needed in the kitchen for dinner duty soon. He gave her a nod to placate her suspicions before stepping out. He sat down next to his friend on the riverbank. They stared at the running water in silence for a moment. The river always captivated Gaara's attention, so different that it was from what he had known all his life. Though it reminded it of home too, he said, of intricate fountains and pools in indoor patios, of the complex irrigation system that kept Suna's meager agriculture running. They could find the home they missed everywhere, he supposed. The girl was in despair. And the child was very young, Gaara said after a moment. He had mentioned it only briefly, but they had all taken careful note of the fact. Though it was strange that it affected them so, after all, they had all been young too, once. They didn't even know if there was a host. One that was still alive. We'll get them out. We won't be able to free them though. Naruto didn't pretend that they would. And it wasn't that they couldn't. Karen and he had been looking into the seals, among other things. As they dived deep into their study of binding seals and souls attached to others, they had inevitably ventured into the most complex seals they knew of. Breaking the seals wouldn't be so hard. It didn't even require any expertise or process. They could break it with their own will. But you never will. They had not talked about it outright. The future, what they would do after, if they were free, if they could be as they pleased. They had to have had the same idea though. That they didn't want to die with their beast still trapped inside. It wasn't the life they wanted for themselves, or for the Biju. And yet, maybe we should just release them into the world, and let the world handle it, Gaara said after a long pause. Naruto didn't have to answer. He had thought about it before as well, yet knew they wouldn't go through with it. You're still not hateful enough. They truly weren't. I can't let you go. Why not? I could contain myself. Like you do. Naruto scoffed, bitter. We are not the same. Really? We're envious the same though. I thought you weren't envious. No one wants to be alone in this life. This one hit a little too close to home. Gaara cast him an inquiring look and Naruto just shrugged, clueless. They would be caught again anyway. Maybe that was a hypocritical excuse. Few were the shinobi strong enough to seal the Biju again, fewer still those who could survive it. But they would find a way, wouldn't they? Even if the beasts behaved, even if they were no longer a threat, their power would just be too tempting. After all, if the warring states had truly wanted to get rid of the threat, they would have found a way. Or just kept killing off Jinchuriki, to buy a few years of peace in between the Biju's incarnations. And you would be all alone, wouldn't you? The fox mocked. That's not true. I am not alone. I won't be. Will they stay, if you free them of their burden? Oh, do you think you will be able to go back home? Who are you without me, do you even know? Naruto startled at Gaara's cold hand setting heavily on the back of his neck. The boy looked concerned and Naruto felt bad for worrying him. He had come to bring him comfort and here he was, getting comforted instead. We will find a way. We will live in peace. Peace was the kanji Han had chosen to be etched into his skin by Gaara's sand, on the back of his hand. It had become an informal tradition, as Yujito also got her own mark. She wouldn't settle for peace, of freedom, she had asked for justice, on the side of her neck, stark against her pale skin. Had she been less rational, Naruto figured she would have gotten revenge instead. Rashi had scoffed at the idea, but Han assured them he was thinking about it. It was a little, trivial thing, but then again it wasn't, for them, to be so blatant about their hopes and wishes, to dare want something for themselves, dare ask something out of this life and world. Good for you then. The bitterness oozed into Naruto's mind like molasses. His mood was affected more and more by the foxes lately, he wasn't sure why. He couldn't tell if he felt his host's emotions or if this restlessness and despair were his own, by sheer empathy. You know I want you to be free. Do I now? It was useless. The fox didn't even trust him with this name, there was no point trying to convince him. Plus, he did it just to reel Naruto up. They shared the same body after all. It wasn't like there was anything they could hide from each other. They had no issue getting into Kiri. Suijutsu led them in confidently, even remarking that surveillance and patrols used to be heavier. He spoke with careful reserve about the new Mizukage, as he had never met her. But it seemed hard to do worse than her predecessor. Naruto was trying his best to hide his nerves and not add to the general tension of the group. He had the strongest foreboding that something was going to go very wrong this time, that they were ill-prepared for this mission. They were following Yujito's tell, who could pick up the faintest presence of their fellow Biju. Naruto was hoping they would find the Sanbai sealed in a teapot or a talking turtle while feeling that it wouldn't be so. They ended up in front of a nondescriptive building with few windows and no guard. Suijutsu asked for confirmation several times, he said this was just some boring administrative offices. Yujito was adamant though, so she led Naruto and Suijutsu in while Karen waited outside, on the lookout for unwanted company. Han was surveying their escape route. They didn't find anything of value, at first. It was as Suijutsu said, desks, chairs, mountains of paperwork. Then, a hidden passageway leading under the building. Their first run-in with a Kirin, Suijutsu made quick work on knocking him out. They had agreed to try and limit the kill number if they could, seeing that Kiri would be mad enough at the end of the night. Yotakata was going to be enraged at them as well, for disturbing his peace, for making his life harder. Naruto had trouble calling up any sympathy for him at the moment though. He had been living next to one of them for what had to be years and never knew a thing. He was at fault here. The basement wasn't for storage. It wasn't even a basement, it was huge, convoluted, going far beyond the limits of the building above. Some rooms were stacked with old scrolls, others with various weapons, some were empty or abandoned. The secret headquarters of one group or another. It was hard to tell if these were clandestine or not, if they were under their cage's order, or not. Private spying groups answering to cage only were as common in the hidden villages as dissident factions working for their own goals. The narrow corridors were lit with weak, flickering light bulbs, but they only encountered one more guard, down a second flight of stairs. She was guarding a cell. And in the cell, there was a child. Purple eyes, gray hair, tied messily out of their face in a high bun. Naruto thought he was a boy, but when the child looked up at them, curious at the noise, he couldn't be so sure. From behind the bars, they were greeted with a toothy smile. "Hello. Who are you?" Naruto was completely frozen. He recognized this place. The bars, the rocky walls, the seals plastered all over. The chains were unused but still visible at the back of the cell, near the bed. Because there was a bed, and a bookshelf and a trunk with some clothes, and a small desk with papers and crayons. Equipped. Lived in. His whole body was tense to the point of pain. He couldn't move nor talk and he couldn't meet the child's gaze, wide and curious. Suigetsu knelt in front of the bar. He smiled. "We are friends. We have come to take you with us." The child frowned, not looking too taken with the idea. Naruto had to focus on something else. He started to check the bars and door for triggering seals, to think about how to open it. "Why? It's Suigetsu paused, searching. "Isabu called us. Name freely given." The Kyuubi scoffed. "Ah. He always says he doesn't like this place. And you do." The kid shrugged. "I don't mind. It's not safe for me outside, and I get plenty of food. And Manjiro is nice to me." Yujito made a hissing noise from where she was watching at the stairs. They didn't have the luxury to linger. "Do you want to come with us?" "Nothing will happen to you," Suigetsu asked gently. Naruto had never seen him like this, soft and attentive. It was only an act, he was sure. It couldn't have escaped him how they looked alike, with the child, and how thin and pale they were, how long they must have been locked down here. In his back, Naruto could feel Yujito boiling, just like the others outside, just like the Sanbai, trapped in the small body in front of them. Their rage echoed each other. They had to get out of here. "Can I? Manjiro says I shouldn't leave here. It's dangerous." "What's dangerous?" "Me," the child said as if it was obvious and Suigetsu was a little dumb for not knowing. "I'm dangerous." "We're safe from you," Suigetsu said. "We're more dangerous than you, so we can take you with us easy." "Really?" It didn't take that much convincing after all. How long? Maybe it was better not to know. Naruto took down the seals. He opened the door. The child still looked suspicious, but it was too tempting in the end. They stepped through the threshold and paused as if testing if some ungodly catastrophe would befall them. Nothing happened. The child beamed. "What is your name?" That only got Suigetsu a blank look. "I'm Suigetsu, and this is Naruto and Yujito." "What about you?" Still nothing. "What do the people here call you?" "How was it, Manjiro?" "Manjiro, what does he say when he talks about you?" That seemed to dot the trick as the child's face brightened in understanding. "Manjiro says Jin." "Jin? That's your name." "He says it's shorter." "Shorter? The others say Jinchuriki, but Jin is shorter." Naruto heard the water drip steadily down his mind, drop after drop in front of his Bijuu's cage. He didn't know which feeling belonged to whom anymore. He was vaguely aware of Suigetsu urging them on, but Yujito was similarly caught on in the rise of their anger, unchecked, unbridled. The child's expression grew worried, as if sensing they had said something wrong. Maybe sensing too the Bijuu stirring in their mind, their feelings shared and amplified. Han was starting to get affected as well. Naruto picked out a current he didn't know, confused and angry. "What are you doing? What is going on?" It had to be Kiri's other Jinchuriki. "Jin. Do you want to come with us?" Suigetsu asked, more firmly this time, final. They stared at each other for a long time, both still and unblinking. There was doubt on the kid's face, but no fear. Were they bargaining with the Sanbai now? The Biju was fiercely protective of his host. Okay. It was said as casually as if they'd been offered a snack. Naruto breathed a sigh of relief. Can I pick you up? Suijutsu asked. Confusion again. He opened his arms and approached carefully. Jin went with it despite the wariness, until Suijutsu had the kid firmly secured in his arms. It seemed a very novel experience for them both. Jin was a little awestruck, doubt forgotten as they tightened their grip on Suijutsu's clothes. Naruto took a few deep breaths. He needed to get a grip. A man of Kiri walked in that very moment. They all froze, taken aback. Except for Jin, undisturbed, who waved at the newcomer with a bright smile. Manjiro, look. They came to take me out. They said it would be safe. Manjiro, do you want to come? Jin had no idea, but Naruto read the look on the man's face instantly. Whatever sympathy he may have shown the kid, that made them trust nothing bad would happen, didn't hold a second in the face of the duty he was to carry out here. Naruto recognized the blank determination. He caught the move, lighting fast, to a weapon pouch in the man's back. But he miscalculated the man's intentions. He didn't think he would go straight for the pair at the end of the corridor, would run past Naruto and Yujito before they could react, would attack Suijutsu right away. The man was cut short in his attack by a stone spike catching him right in the chest. Sprung out of Jin's back. The child stared, horrified, as the man still tried to reach his target, swinging uselessly the kunai in his hand while blood poured out of his pierced chest and ran down his mouth. Manjiro. He died before he could give an answer. It was hard to keep track, after that. Whose wrath exploded first and whose followed, who made the hole in the ceiling, who toppled the building. If Naruto let the beast rage or if it was all him, if it was his fury, his need for blood and retribution. If it was Jin's, Yujito's, the Sanbai, the Rokubai. All of them. Someone put their hands on his shoulders and he nearly bit their throat. It was Karen. The fear in her eyes brought him briefly back to himself, but he couldn't fight this on his own. They had found out they were calmer around each other, more grounded, but they never got the occasion to test it the other way around. And there was Jin at the center of it all, mad and terrified, with no reign over the Sanbai whatsoever, and the Biju half mad too with isolation and despair. The Kirinin that came at them didn't stand a chance. They cut their way out of Kiri through overwhelmed forces who didn't know what was happening, and the urge to tear them to shred and to burn this place to the ground was overwhelming in its intensity. Almost enough to stir them from the safer path far from here, almost enough to turn them fully toward destruction. It was Han who caught them back. As soon as he reached them, he imposed the weight of their chakra onto theirs, heavy and cold like a tidal wave. Smothering out the fire ignited in their mind, bringing them back to the present. He took Jin from Suijutsu's arms. The child's manifestation of the Sanbai had cut deeply into the man's arms and body, and Han had to pry Jin out like a thorn. Karen went to work immediately, to repair some of the damage and stop the bleeding. Suijutsu whined painfully, but he hadn't let go of the child, not once, and he even managed a wobbly smile. Jin was sobbing quietly, all energy spent, leaving only grief. Naruto just then realized that Utakata had joined them. Similarly dazed, he must have been caught in their fury too. He had blood on his hands, as Yujito and Naruto did. He looked resigned. Guess I don't have a choice then. They beat a hasty retreat to Naruto's closest seal and teleported far away from Kiri, chased by the screams and general panic of a village woken up by an outside attack. Jin had a death grip on Han's gi, face buried in its rough fabric. Naruto had to focus on that. It was the early hours of the morning when they made it back to the temple, but everyone was awake, waiting for them. They had felt something was amiss. There was no small amount of raised eyebrows and incredulous look at Han's tiny burden, carefully wrapped in his arms. As soon as Naruto had delivered them safely to their sanctuary, as soon as the tension went down a notch, Utakata was the first to explode. Why the hell did you do this? And Naruto couldn't take his accusatory tone, couldn't take his reproach as if none of this was of any concern to him, as if it hadn't been his village, his oversight. What? The part where we had to free a kid from jail? Or the one where we had to try and not be killed? The man's eyes flickered to Jin, still hiding in Han's hold and unwilling to come out of it for now. The tall man didn't seem to mind. He simply sat down on a log in the courtyard and secured Jin more firmly in his arms. Yotakata had the decency to soften some of his outrage, though not all. I didn't know. How could you not know? How could they reach us here, and not you? Did you not? Or did you just not listen? Gaara came to stand close to Naruto. He had no choice but to turn to him, as always when the other boy was near. Despite himself, some of his anger receded, leached out by Gaara's steadier mind. Do you think you did the right thing then? Yotakata asked. Do you think you did the smart thing? No one here thought that. This was a disaster. Going openly against one of the shinobi villages was the last thing they wanted. Kiri wouldn't let that fly. This wasn't like a skirmish outside of their borders, this wasn't something they could just brush off. How many casualties? And so openly too. No mistake possible, they would all know what had happened. The other villages too. And they would know it was 8 out of 9 now. They would know with certainty. What happened back then? Karen asked. She was making an effort not to sound accusing or disapproving, but Naruto knew she was. She was mad at them, at him. It wasn't supposed to go this way. Yujito stood away from the group, face haunted, distant. She had the most control, out of them all, yet she had been the most affected. And her capacities for wreaking havoc were unmatched. Naruto had no idea how to comfort her, what to say, how to act. He was lost. There's no point dwelling on it tonight, Niji said forcefully when it appeared likely that they would just stand there all night if no one did anything. Wash up and go to sleep, we'll talk tomorrow. And you? I'll show you around. Yotakata followed him, unhappy, but short of choices for now. No one asked anything about the kid. Han seemed to handle it and they were all too happy to leave it to him. They didn't exactly have their own room per se. Some couldn't sleep alone, some couldn't sleep with others, for some it depended. They took turns and crashed in the beds available at the moment. It would be seriously crowded now. They would need to find extra mattresses and blankets. At least the nights were warm. Naruto didn't ask and Gaara didn't say anything, but he followed Naruto to a secluded corner of one of the rooms. It was a tight fit for two, they lay facing each other, foreheads practically touching. Naruto couldn't bear to look him in the eyes though, so he ducked to hide against his chest. Gaara wrapped a hand around his head. They slept poorly. They were woken up by laughter. Loud, high-pitched, bouncing on the walls of the temple. Unrestrained and joyful as only a child could be. For a brief moment, Naruto was sick with longing and heartache. He was back in his lonely flat, listening to the children playing outside, getting scolded by their parents and laughing with their friends, and he was afraid of going out, of the silence that followed him wherever he went. But then he heard Karen howl, "What do you think you're doing?" and the present forced itself back into his mind like a hammer to the face. Naruto ran out of the temple to find an irate Karen scolding a mildly confused Han while Jin burrowed in his Haori, probably scared of the mean-looking firehead currently screaming at their face. That child has been locked underground for Sage knows how long and you just take him out in the sun like that? Do you want all his skin to fall off his body? Huh? Do you? The child let out a curt sob and Naruto took it as his cue to step in and explain to Karen that this was not what one would call a child-friendly voice. You'll scare her, come on. Her. They all looked at each other, obviously not of the same opinion on the matter. I thought he was a boy, Karen said. Naruto shrugged. I couldn't say for sure. Should we just ask? Jin looked from one to the other, confused but not that interested in the conversation anyway. They decided to push back this question to another time. They would need to make the presentation anyway, to talk to the Sanbai if they could. Jin agreed to follow Karen inside on the condition that Han stayed with them the whole time and was allowed outside again only once Karen deemed the kid buttered in enough sunscreen, with strict instruction not to take off that wide straw hat hanging low on their head. It was large enough that it acted more like an umbrella than a regular hat, which was probably the point. Spring was getting warm, and Karen owned many hats. Han was great with the child and Naruto wondered how that came to be. He couldn't say if he would be good at it. He had barely interacted with children at all in his life. Parents tended to keep them away from him. Suijutsu came to join, but it got Jin anxious, eyes set on his naked arms, the faint scars of the earlier cuts still healing. Hurting the ones close to them by accident was among their worst fears, and it was far too easy, easier than they had thought. They had told the child they would be safe with them, and look how that had turned out. But Suijutsu didn't say a thing. Whether he understood he shouldn't, or truly didn't even get what the issue was, he simply bypassed the child's worry to pick them up into a hug as a greeting. He apologized for waking up so late and missing half the fun. Jin accepted it easily. Young enough that doubts and regrets wouldn't linger. Naruto watched them as the child gave chase around the garden, Suijutsu matching his pace with theirs to keep the game up. Gaara came to sit by his side after a while, and then the others too, as they woke up one by one. There was something about this scene. It felt special, almost sacred. Jin was smaller and thinner than a child her age should be, her skin unnaturally pale and her speech stilted as if lacking practice, but she was free now. If it was in their hands, if they had any power in it, her future would be much different. She wouldn't grow up as they did. Naruto wished he could stay like this. Keep watch and smile, and be there when the child looked up toward them, reassured that someone was looking after her, that she wasn't alone, never would be. She grew curious about them at some point. "Are you Isabu's friend?" she asked Yujito, thinking back of the previous night, of what the beast might have whispered to her. "We are. Do you want to see?" The child nodded eagerly. Yujito cast a quick glance to her fellow Jinhiriki, so that they would follow her lead. Yotakata was less than enthusiastic, but he had to be curious enough that he didn't say anything and sat as they did on the cool grass. Jin settled on Han's lap, getting excited now. There wasn't any process to it, they didn't have to hold hands or sign or anything. They just closed their eyes, and the ones who were more experienced could drag the others under. They picked the child up and deposited him in the forest among them. He eyed the roaming-tailed beasts with awe as they welcomed the latest of their own to join the group, to be reunited with them. It was now 8 out of 9. The sensation was indescribable, their shared feelings, their collective longing, the power that flew between them. Jin was wild with it, untrained and unrestrained, but it wasn't hard to contain him. He was curious and awestruck, kept asking about them and everything around them. Gone was the cage from his mind already. It was for the best. Gratitude was pouring out of the Sanbai, washing over them in gentle ways. They could only get a glimpse of the feelings hidden behind, the years chained, the forced sealing, feeling the agony of 2 of his hosts that had died holding on to him. He couldn't tell them much about Jin, or the people who had made her a host. He couldn't tell them her real name, her age, or where she came from. He couldn't even tell. "It's your turn to feed it today." They kept clear of the memories after that. It could be tricky to keep track of their physical form when they meditated in this way. Still, Naruto distinctly felt the weight of someone leaning against his back, and he could even tell who it was right away. He came back to himself to Karen sitting against him, side pressed to him and head resting on the back of his neck. He didn't move until she did. "Were we gone long?" "It stretches the more you are." The sun was high now, the heat higher. The other stirred, blinked in the bright light, a little disoriented. "I couldn't come and get you. If you got lost." She didn't voice it often, but it was a fear that didn't leave her, ever since that time during their stay with Orochimaru when he had to be put down like a wild beast, when he wreaked havoc on the place and would have done worse, had it not been for Orochimaru's proficiency with taming. The man had been pleased by this development, Karen, not so much. It was the first and only time Naruto had manifested more than 6 tails. The first and only time he had met his father. They left Jin with Han. They had to talk about what happened, about what they would do next. Naruto didn't want to. Karen dragged him inside. Yotakata looked marginally less sour and displeased than he had the day before, or even upon waking up. Maybe seeing the child properly had knocked some sense into his brain. He was still the one to talk first, even if not as harsh as he could have been. "You didn't have to do it this way." It was Yujito who answered right away, incensed, still filled with contained fury. "Do you think we struck first?" The look on his face was answer enough. She hissed. "Do you think we had no better plan than to attack outright one of the villages? To kill their people and destroy their buildings, to put all of them on our tail. She took a deep breath, trying to keep her restraint. Do you think it couldn't have been worse? She said tightly. Yotakata looked away, unable to bear her accusing gaze. Of course it could have been much worse. Kiri had to know that. That was what would scare them further. Are we not allowed our anger and outrage, simply because it is too much to handle? If they wanted to protect themselves from our wrath, couldn't they have just treated us fairly? Are we to keep taking everything standing still, in fear of what we could unleash? Maybe if we had shown them before, then the child wouldn't have been where we found him. How many times had they dreamed of it? To just lose it, to show them. Even before he knew what he was capable of, what he truly was, Naruto already wished to be strong enough that he could show the village what it cost to treat him the way they did. To demand respect and care by force, or else. The villages had been lucky thus far that the Jinchuriki had been so docile. No more, no more. Fine, so you are better off here. For how long? What now? Yotakata said you as if he wasn't part of it, one of them. You can go back where you came from if you don't care about any of this. As if I could. Oh but you can, easy, Rashi butted in, smiling and humorless. Just go back and tell them where we are. They'll welcome you nicely. Yotakata grimaced, offended. Gaara stepped in, calmer, trying to defuse the tension. We are sorry it went down this way. It's not what we wanted. I understand it wasn't your wish to be here. None of us likes being stuck here, Rashi added ruefully. He realized his misstep as Naruto's face wrinkled, but it was Fu who answered, in a mumble, I like it here. I didn't mean. I'll go play with the kid, the girl declared before leaving the room. Yujito looked like she wanted to go after her but decided against it. Naruto refrained from going too. He didn't want to talk about any of it, but he still felt guilty, still felt responsible for this mess. He was the one to drag them here with no plan and no idea of what would happen to them next. He was the one who couldn't get them out. We'll wait for news, Yujito concluded with a long sigh, admitting that it was pointless discussing a situation they had no information on. No one would find them here, at least. They had some time. Some time turned out to be just a few hours. Akito popped in just as they were finishing eating lunch in tense silence, filled only by Jin's curious noises at everything they could get their hands on, oblivious to the surrounding tension. I have news, the fox announced proudly. Jin's attention was hooked immediately. She tried to grab at him and he escaped with a whelp before going to perch on Naruto's head, to the child's split delight and disappointment. What do they want for me? The fox whispered, puzzled. Han laughed by Naruto's side. Just to play. Akito decided to stay on his perch. I have news. Your cage are all going to meet in the Land of Iron. This time even Jin was sensitive to the sudden tension, judging by how she fell silent, looking around her worriedly from her place on Fu's lap. The girl laid a soothing hand on her head but didn't move her attention away from the little fox. All of them? Niji asked. I'm not sure. At least 5, he told me. The more powerful ones. Who told you? Akito marked a pause. I can't say. But I'm sure. They are on their way right now. They need to discuss current threats and what to do about them. Akito could hardly have brought them worse news. Will they ally? Fu asked, voicing the fear they all had. The villages seldom ever agreed on anything, especially not all at the same time. But this could just be the thing, right? They could agree on coordinating their search and resources. They could make a deal for if a village caught a Jinchuriki that wasn't their own. To trade, to bargain. They could decide to join forces, and what then? I think we should be there, he said. It was immediately clear who thought it was a good idea, and who didn't. What? Karen shrieked, jumping to her feet. She would probably have tried to strangle him if not for the fox on his head. If they are going to discuss our fate, I think we should go and have a say. And what, are you just gonna walk into their little gathering? He didn't bother answering her. Of course they had to plan, but it wasn't such unreasonable an idea, as long as they could easily escape. I can help, Akito piped up. Naruto tried to look up but the fox was hiding beyond his messy hair. He was unusually forward today. I can get you in and out. I can. Only me. Naruto was glad that the fox gave it careful consideration before answering. He had overestimated himself before, eager to prove his worth. But he was growing older and wiser. You for sure. Others, I don't know. Naruto's mind was already made despite the various degrees of disapproval he could read on his companions' faces. He would try to convince them, but in the end they couldn't stop him from going. He wouldn't stay idle and do nothing while strangers decided on their fate between themselves. He would force them to compose with the will of the Jinchuriki, to recognize their power. He would obtain their freedom, one way or another. Chapter 18. The trip was tense and quiet to the Land of Iron. Tsunade had sent a formal mission order so that some of them would meet her at the summit, what was left of Team 7 and Team Guy. The Godame was traveling from Kiri with the Mizukage in her party, and the Inyazuka. The others were back on track for their mission in Suna, Anko's team on their way to Konoha. Messages came and went so that they all kept informed. Sakura had taken to reading them aloud because Sasuke couldn't be bothered. He was lost in thought, unreachable. She didn't try as hard as she should have either, she wasn't sure what she would tell him. Kiri wasn't on the warpath yet simply because they didn't have the means, while Kumo, despite being the last of the villages to still hold on to one of their Jinchuriki, were the most vindictive when it came to the rogue hosts. The Raikage most likely feared his brother would be snatched away too. And who would stop the Jinchuriki, if they wanted to take him? It was 8 of them together now. They had broken in and out of the very heart of Kirigakure, leaving chaos and destruction in their wake. The villages couldn't stop them. But the Akatsuki could. They had been quiet since the defeat of Kakuzu and Haiden, but there was no reason to believe they had abandoned their pursuit of the Jinchuriki. Their motivation was as mysterious as ever, yet if they had been enemies of the villages when they meant to take their weapon from them. The situation was different when said weapons had developed a will of their own. Naruto and his friends could be as strong as they wanted, what could they do against all the hidden villages and the Akatsuki combined? What was he thinking? How did they hope to achieve peace for themselves now? Sakura didn't have it in her to defend him. It wasn't their fight anymore, maybe it never was. Naruto had made his choices, he walked his path. He clearly didn't need them nor wanted them to be involved, and what could they do for him? He wasn't a part of their life anymore, they weren't a part of his. If their path crossed again, it would be coincidental, and it maybe wouldn't even be a good omen. She knew better than to talk like this to Sasuke though. He had his doubts, but he would never let go. To be fair to him, it wasn't entirely tied to Naruto, Sasuke was a peacekeeper by nature. Be it between his friends, the members of his family and his clan, the shinobi arguing in the Hokage office, foreign nations at each other's throats, Sasuke would get in between. He would try to mediate, to appease. The scope of Naruto's destructions, or anyone's, was beside the point, he would still argue for reconciliation, for compromise. Even if it didn't benefit him and his own in any way, even if it didn't concern him at all. A healer at heart. Sakura wasn't so noble. Naruto could find his way out of this mess himself, as far as she was concerned. They had to take care of their own. Guy and his team had been sent out with them. Even the loud man and his over-energetic student struggled to lift the mood though, as the specter of war loomed over their future, though Sakura always found pleasure in the boy's company, in his cheerful demeanor and optimistic look on their situation. He was positive, not naive. After all, he missed his friend too. It was bad enough that the hunt for the Jinchuriki was back on the program, but what would the villages make of them, if they succeeded? Ah. Maybe that was why Naruto's band had gone all out after all. It didn't change anything in the long run, it wasn't as if they were going to be left in peace forever. She truly hoped they would achieve it, but for now she didn't see how. Though there was no way to say for sure what the Cage would decide, when they met in the first summit in decades. From when she had met them or went through their city, she couldn't say she had much confidence in what they would decide. Maybe there was hope still. Maybe they could find a way out. She was talking taijutsu and routine training with Lee when she was embarrassingly startled by something landing directly on her head in a bang, making her stumble and curse. Sakura sister. She reached up to grab from her hair the blotted form of one extremely distressed toad. Gamakaki? What are you doing here? The rest of the party relaxed their hands on their weapons and seals, seeing that there was no threat after all. She dismissed Sasuke's worries with a quick wave of her hand, focused on the usually cocky toad. Jiraiya is in trouble. He's in trouble in AIM. She had vaguely heard of her master fucking off to the land of rain for one reason or another. She hardly paid attention to his wanderings, but... Did he send you? He did. It had to be very bad. What's happening? Kakashi asked, approaching the pair. They had all stopped in their tracks, waiting. Sakura saw anxiety and doubts on her companions' faces. Why did Jiraiya of all people have to need assistance now? She looked back to Kakashi. I have to go. She cut Sasuke before he could get one single word out, almost slapping him to shut his mouth with her hand. Don't even think about it. I'll handle it. You're needed there. Always so noble, that idiot, with his grand ideas and ambitions that he would drop in an instant to lend a hand, be useful. He would need to learn that frustration soon enough. To do the politics while his friends fought the fight. This was the path they had set on. Are you sure? Kakashi asked. She appreciated that he asked instead of ordering. Mission orders were not an issue, the Hokage surely wouldn't take offense. Still, he could stop her from going, if he wanted to, if he deemed it best. She nodded firmly. All right. Be careful then. She didn't waste time making goodbyes, only squeezing Sasuke's wrist briefly, hoping to bring him some comfort and strength. Take me there, Gamakaki. It was even worse with Sakura gone. Even when they didn't talk and even if they often disagreed, Sasuke always felt better just for her presence. They shared their emotions, they understood each other. She didn't think like he did, but she knew. She knew his heart, knew his feelings. They didn't have to talk it out. Being near her was enough to bring him comfort. She also wasn't above slapping him on the back of his head when he was being too moody for her taste. They stopped running and walked for a while, to recuperate. It made conversation easier, exactly what Sasuke wanted to avoid. He couldn't just say no though when Tenten fell into step with him. She stayed silent a moment, but he could sense she had something to say. She was staring at Lee's back, skipping a few steps ahead. I think we have the right to be angry, she said casually, almost to herself. They kept walking, the distance enough that the others wouldn't hear. At what? He asked, deciding to see this through. She shrugged. Everything. Anything. It's too tiring to assign blame. So better to blame the whole world. Is there someone who's not at fault? There wasn't. It was what made it so hard and so frustrating. Everything would have been much easier if they could just point a finger and dish out punishment. Then they could move on and forget about it. But who was to blame for their friends leaving, for their village waging war on them, for this entire mess? Who was not to blame? The million things they could have done differently, all the decisions they should have made, had they known better. What if? She was right. It was exhausting. I'll punch Neji in the face when I see him again. He let out a short laugh and she grinned, though it held a tinge of sadness too. That would be nice. That would be easy. Sasuke isolated himself from the rest when they broke next for a rest. The tension was palpable, and if some would want to talk it out, Sasuke just wanted to escape it for a while. He sat at the foot of an old tree and looked up at the dense tapestry of leaves that shielded them from the heat of the day. It reminded him of a similar time, years ago, of watching Naruto turn his back and leave, of fighting against himself not to call him back, not to stop him. He still couldn't say if he regretted it or not, if he had made the right choice. He had been so scared that Naruto would hate him if he tried to hold him back, but didn't he hate them anyway now? Sasuke understood Tenten's sentiment, but then again, if he had the chance, he would rather hug his friend when he met him again at last. His perusing was interrupted, once more, by the characteristic noise of a summon. Hello, hi. Sasuke blinked stupidly at the little fox. Akito. The fox beamed. I'm glad you remember my name. He was a little bigger than the last time Sasuke had seen him, his fur a little darker. He was wearing a blue kimono with a white flower print, and he had a scroll strapped to his back, almost as big as him. "What are you doing here?" Sasuke failed to keep the hostility entirely out of his voice, and the fox's smile dimmed a little. "I'm looking for news. And you seemed sad. I thought I could keep you company. How did you find me?" The fox looked sheepish, maybe a little embarrassed. "I keep an eye on you." "For Naruto?" "Ah, no. He doesn't know. He asked a few times, but I think it was painful for him. He stopped after a while." Sasuke didn't know how to take that. "Why then?" "I just worried about you. You were nice to me, and to Naruto too. I like you." Somehow this was the explanation Sasuke would have deemed least likely. It was hard to doubt the little fox though, all earnest and shy. "Okay. Thanks." They talked. Sasuke couldn't deny it was weird, but not for the obvious reasons. It was just that Akito didn't seem to understand most of his struggles. The conflicts they faced, the choices they had to make. The fox asked questions and seemed interested, but it was obvious he didn't get it. He didn't get why they didn't live the way they wanted, he didn't get why they weren't together with the people they wanted to be close to. His confusion extended to Naruto as well, he observed, but he remained puzzled. Sasuke envied him. When it was time to go back with the others and leave, Akito climbed into his Haori. Sasuke tightened the belt as a support as the fox got comfortable against his chest. He couldn't deny that the warm weight was kind of comforting. He had gotten used to carrying Jiji around in a similar way, and he missed the haughty cat, left back home to run messages. It was a good thing Sakura wasn't there after all, as she was the only other one to know about Naruto's foxes. His companion didn't ask questions, accepted Sasuke's one-word explanation of summon. They were all familiar enough with it. For the next few days as they made their way to the Land of Iron, Akito kept popping in and out, to chat or just to travel comfortably in Sasuke's clothes. Jiji was going to get jealous at this point. The cat would know somehow, Sasuke was sure. It was sort of comforting to ponder over such a trivial matter. The rain fell as heavy as Jiraiya as predicted, but it was only this, rain. The menacing aura in its drops was gone. Sakura set to follow it. There was nothing more she could do here. They made it to the Land of Iron at the end of the third day. The temperature had dropped and the weather had turned snowy and bleak, tanking their already low mood. Sasuke suffered the cold less than his companions thanks to Akito, still bundled in his clothes and as warming as a brazier. He had received sporadic news from Sakura, who was, last he had heard, tailing some Akatsuki members away from AIM. She sent him little frogs and toads that eyed the fox warily, though he was forbidden to eat any. She had not mentioned Jiraiya at all. He didn't know what it meant. The latest message came just as they crossed the border, with a minuscule frog jumping on Sasuke's hand to spit a tightly rolled piece of paper in his waiting palm. "Still in pursuit. Heading your way." They met the Hokage Inn just down the mountain, waiting for them with the Inyazuka. Sasuke shared the message. He wished they could have waited for her but they didn't have time to linger. Tsunade ordered him and Kakashi to follow her, and the others to stay down there, on alert, ready to leave or to fight if need be, knowing to expect an attack. From whom was anyone's guess. With some luck they would be done before enemies could reach them. Akito asked if he could stay with Sasuke, and there was no reason to refuse him. His presence was rather comforting. "Why won't the others follow us?" he asked Kakashi as they sped up through the snow. The man smiled behind his mask. Each cage was only allowed 2 guards each. It took a minute for Sasuke to understand what that meant. "And she asked for you, and me?" Some weren't pleased. But she made her choice. It wasn't surprising. Sasuke couldn't speak for the other cage, but he supposed they had brought their strongest fighters just in case. Sasuke was by no means weak, but there were a lot of better Konoha shinobi. "She said the spot was yours," Kakashi added, with neutral enough a tone that Sasuke couldn't guess what he thought of it. He would have been more upset at the disapproval of his elders if he hadn't been focused on the much more relevant fact that Tsunade had wanted him to be there. She probably had to negotiate that with the other Jounin, willing to bear their nagging and whining, as she said. Their dismissal was nothing compared to that. Sasuke had to make good of it. The Land of Iron, home of the samurai and removed from shinobi politics, was as small and inhospitable as rumored. Hosted on the flanks of an imposing mountain, split into 3 rocky growths and aptly named the Three Wolves Mountain, it was mainly a bunch of hardy buildings clinging to the frozen cliffs, linked with staircases carved out of the mountain itself. They climbed quite a few of them to reach the palace where the leadership of the country had accepted to host the summit. Given how quickly it had been arranged, it was hard to believe the Raikage had only started to plan this after the attack on Kiri. He was already there when they arrived, with 2 guards. He was an imposing man, with dark skin and defined muscles largely shown by his bared chest under his open haori. His 2 guards were unremarkable in comparison. Terumime was there as well, as she had traveled with Tsunade from Kiri. Sasuke had seen in passing the one-eyed man accompanying her during the Chunin exam. The other one was younger, closer to Sasuke's age, and looked uncomfortable at being here. That made 2 of them at least. They needed to wait for the other delegations and the atmosphere was suffocating. Sasuke took to wandering the building with the thin excuse of checking their surroundings, just in case. Tsunade wasn't fooled, but he applied to it once he was out of sight, as it wasn't such a bad idea to be prepared. They were supposed to be in neutral territory, but the company surely wasn't neutral. He crossed paths with several samurai in their armor, carrying heavy weaponry with ease. They sure had strength and power, albeit very different from what Sasuke was used to in his fellow shinobi. However, in a side corridor, he stumbled upon someone much more familiar. He couldn't place why. It was a tall man from Kumo. If his headband didn't give it away, his striking resemblance with the Raikage did. They had a similar hairstyle and skin color, and their clothes were alike too. He was crouched on the floor, looking, for lack of a better word, sulky. Sasuke should have ignored him, but there was this thing. Was it the man's aura, his chakra? Sasuke was confident he had never met him before, not even in passing, but he was familiar all the same. The choice was taken out of his hand anyway. The man jumped to his feet when he spotted him, with surprising grace given his bulky frame. Yo! Who are you then? Sasuke couldn't help looking around, unsure if the man was talking to him. They were alone in this corner of the building. I'm Uchiha Sasuke, from Konoha. I'm here with the Godame Hokage, for the summit. He waited, until it was certain the man wasn't going to make his own introduction in turn. And, you are? Out of the blue, the man struck an absurd pose, hands in clutches and perched on one leg, and exclaimed, way louder than necessary in this close space, I'm the one, the only, Killer BBB. Sasuke was a bit distressed at the display. It would have been rude to just cut the conversation short though. Are you here with the Raikage? Yo, my bro dragged me here, then said I couldn't show. I have to stay away, they say. Oh well, Sasuke was probably needed back, right? That couldn't be helped. Sorry, I need to. Be-sama. Shit, gotta go. The man hightailed out of there fast, chased down by a couple of out-of-breath shinobi from his village. Wait. The man screeched to a halt. His companions crashed against his frame, sending them to the floor while he didn't move an inch. He turned back with an irritated scowl. What ya want? Are you? He had said bro, right? Brother, the brother of the Raikage. Who else would the man insist to bring, despite the 2 guards' rule? Are you the Jinhuriki of the 8 Tails? He thought the question would be met with offense or suspicion, but the man only reprimanded him with an "It's Hakubi-sama for you, brat," before running away. The other shinobi scrambled after him with no mind for Sasuke's presence. He was soon alone again. He made his way back to the main hall, head spinning. It was the chakra of a tailed beast he had felt. He had never realized it was so distinct before. It wasn't as if he had met that many of them, but he was sure of it. That was the second Jinhuriki of Kumo. The only one still in its village possession. And in no hurry to left it, it seemed. Did they offer? Did he refuse? After all, the Jinhuriki went to Kumo at least once. They convinced the other one. Did it take much? They would have needed less than a minute to recruit Naruto, back then, if it had gone this way. But would the others have left, before he had come to them? Was it bound to happen, or was it all on Naruto? Maybe he would look for this man again later. The delegation from Suna arrived soon after. They acknowledged each other only briefly, even if Temari looked like she wanted to talk to Sasuke, and he would have appreciated it. But it didn't feel right to talk casually right now. After all was said and done, maybe. Or maybe they would go back to sharpen their weapons. The last one to arrive was the Tsuchikage of IWA. A small, dry old man dwarfed by his guards, both the normal-sized one and the other, much taller one. Sasuke stayed close to Tsunade. He didn't need to be so worried when she was near, he simply had to follow her cues, fall into her step. He found purpose again in her presence, he had to support his master. The rest could wait. There was no introduction and they all gave each other snide, distrustful looks as they were shown into the meeting room, or they superbly ignored each other. The cage kept the floor. Their followers had to go up above them, on the platform surrounding the central space. The leader of the Land of Iron, a middle-aged man with long gray hair called Mifune, was to mediate the encounter. Sasuke understood his country would not be involved in any way, which seemed an odd stance. If war raged on the land, were they expected to politely stop at their borders? Maybe they were. Sasuke had studied military history a lot with Ino, and wars and battles were never as chaotic and uncontrollable as they were meant to look. It could all be terribly civilized. Well, let's begin then, Temari started, after a heavy silence where they assessed each other without saying a word. We are here to talk about the threat of the Akatsuki. We are here to talk about the threat of the Jinchuriki, the Tsuchikage countered immediately. Your father didn't teach you politeness, Kazekage. You're awfully presumptuous for a child. I apologize. You're right, my father had no wisdom to spare. That's why I'm seating in his place now. There were displeased mumbling from all sides before Terumime snapped at them to do away with the bickering. Which one do you propose we tackle first then, Mizukage? The old man picked up. After all, you're the one who was wronged by the Jinchuriki. She cast him a disdainful glance. There is no question, Temari interjected. The Akatsuki is the threat right now. The Jinchuriki have only kept to their own, Temari said. The Mizukage scoffed, angry. Is that what they did in Kiri? It didn't deter the younger Kage. Isn't it? What do you mean? We hear there was a child. The woman clicked her tongue. Is nothing kept a secret these days? If we had kept less secret, we would have known much sooner that they were trying to band together, Tsunade remarked with faux casualty. As if the villages would advertise the loss of their Jinchuriki, the Tsuchikage exclaimed. Of course we handled it quietly. Afraid for your reputation. Temari mocked. She was the only one who had ground to do so. Around the table, they had all made the same choice. Do you know what happened to the last village that lost its hold on their Jinchuriki, child? The Mizukage slammed her fist on the desk in front of her, hard enough that the wood cracked loudly into the sudden silence. The Jinchuriki are a far more potent threat, the Raikage went on as if nothing had happened. The Akatsuki? We don't even know if they are that dangerous. Yet 8 of the 9-tailed beasts have joined forces already. You say that because you're the only one who retains one. They will turn to you next, Temari said, not without satisfaction. That's a moot point, Tsunade cut before they could get into another fight. The Akatsuki is also after the Jinchuriki. We don't know that for certain. Yes, we do. Jiraiya is sure, and it's not like they set up a whole plan that ended with the death of the Kazekage just to capture my brother. The rage in Temari's voice when she spoke of her father made an uncomfortable twist in Sasuke's heart. They had both lost their father with a lot unsaid between them, but his own had not failed him the way hers had. That anger was aimless and unresolved, and thus hard to shake off. If what you want is to keep score, the Akatsuki made a direct attack against Konoha and purposefully targeted one of our strongest fighters. With success, the Tsuchikage piped. Sasuke could feel Kakashi's warning glare on him, so he did all he could not to look affected, not to let show his outrage and hurt. He had to stay collected and focused. Now wasn't the time for sentiment. We don't know why the Akatsuki has such an interest in the hosts, Terumime said, pensive. Isn't it obvious? Tsunade said. Why else but to harvest their power? They might seek to neutralize them. And would that be so bad? What are you saying? That we should have done away with the Biju a long time ago. And that's what you suggest now. You would let the Akatsuki do your dirty work for you, huh? The Raikage toned, his voice loud and rumbling, easily covering all others. Yet again. But it is fitting after all. The Akatsuki is your doing. They have served you well already. To Suzuki's astonishment, there was no one but Temari to take offense at that. What do you mean? Ah. The little Kaze Kage doesn't know? All these fools and cowards, afraid they couldn't maintain their own power, they figured it would come in handy. Mercenaries that do nothing but train and fight, that can be sent on any mission, take any contract. Iwa, Konoha, Suna, Kiri, you all made good use of them during the war, so don't come crying now that they have escaped your control. They do their job well, they take on any mission for a low price, Jiraiya had said. There have always been missions the village wouldn't take on, he had said. But he had not said, and it served us right until now. He had not said, and thus we were right to set them up. And now they had killed his father. Did it count for nothing? Oh, maybe it didn't. Why would they care, the other villages? As long as it was no direct threat to them, they would not care about the victim, about the destruction, about the pain and loss. Who knew if this wasn't the doing of one of them, even? The Raikage was known to seek military power and dominance over the other villages, and Kiri too had never been shy about eliminating outside threats. Suna, sending their Jinhiriki to the Chunin exam, Iwa who went against Konoha twice in 2 wars and who might have been fetching for another. What was the point? What were they even doing here? They all hated each other, all sought each other's destruction or subjugation. Even the very real danger threatening them all wasn't enough to have them act any civilized. Our priority must be to rein in the rogue Jinhiriki, the Tsuchikage declared, again dismissing what had been said before him. And what will you do with them? The Mizukage asked sweetly, the hint of a threat. The Biju are the property of their respective villages. Oh, really? Wouldn't you try a little redistribution while you're at it? And this one, she pointed at the Raikage, won't pass up the chance either, I'm sure. Kumo is the only village who managed to retain their Jinhiriki, so it seems that we do not all have family members to sacrifice to the Biju. Even that didn't help Suna. Enough. Hands flew to various weapons at the forceful interruption, but Temari was still sitting and they stayed put, for now. I don't care about the scores, Temari said through gritted teeth, fed up already with this whole conversation. Suna will not give chase to the Jinhiriki, nor will we aid any of you to do the same. And if you do harm to my brother and his people, you will make an enemy out of us. And with all of them short of their tailed beast, it was a very real threat. You're ruled over by your emotions, child, the Tsuchikage chided in disdain. This is why women are no good for Tsuchikage. He turned a dark look at Terumi Mei, offended at the interruption. Her smile was sharp, full of teeth. We women do not have to agree on anything, she said calmly, but out of consideration for your old age that might have dulled your sense of observation, I will gently point out to you the tough reality here. It is 3 of us, and 2 of you. So please think about the comment you are about to make. Until recently, it would have been 5 men at the table. But things changed fast. Is any of you interested in moving this conversation along? Tsunade asked, with what Suzuki believed to be an attempt at politeness, but certainly didn't come out as such to the other cage. And it wasn't any of them who answered. I am. In the middle of the room, springing straight out of the floor, appeared what looked like a white-skinned man, though half of his face and body were deformed beyond comprehension, flattened as if he had melted. In an instant the guards had stepped in to protect their cage, weapons out on the circular table, ready to face an enemy. The man didn't seem concerned by the hostility and danger. He was smiling widely, almost as large as his whole face. That's no way to welcome a pacifist representative of the Akatsuki. Suzuki's body was hurting with tension and restraint, his mind into overdrive as he tried to analyze their situation, too many variables, too many dangers intersecting around them. And in the middle of it all a member of the Akatsuki springing in here so casually, so at ease. It made him sick. But he couldn't act rashly. What could you possibly have come to say? The Raikage asked, menacing. The man only shrugged. Well, you seemed to be torn over your next course of action. My name is Zetsu, I speak on behalf of the organization. We thought we would give you incentives to make the right choice. To Sasuke's disgust, it was obvious everyone was actually interested in that. Talk then. No need to be so aggressive. The Akatsuki wishes to offer their services, as always. We are more than willing to rid you of your little deserters problem. Now why would you want to do that? Tsunade asked conversationally, though Sasuke could feel her tension even without seeing her. He was looking at the world with the sharp edges of the Sharingan, and he knew there was little point in attacking the thing talking to them. It didn't look like any clone he had ever encountered, but it wasn't a man either. As mentioned, the Jinhuriki are bad for our business. And yours, aren't they? Such a headache, so volatile, and so difficult to control. It is in everyone's interest to put an end to their wanderings. No other reason, right? Is that why you tried to take away the host of the One Tail? Taking out the competition? Killing him would have been more efficient, I believe. The envoy smiled even wider, cutting. Are you doubting my words, Hokage? The fake offense was grating. Enough of this nonsense, the Raikage toned, launching himself at the Akatsuki puppet. He evaded him easily. What's so unreasonable about it? You cannot take down the Jinhuriki on your own. And you cannot take us down either. Meaning they would need to ally with one to take care of the other. Amidst the chaos, it took them all a moment to hear the most polite, quiet cough. Excuse me? Excuse me. It was Akito. Perched on the platform where Sasuke and the rest of the guards stood just a moment ago, and Sasuke had not even noticed the fox had left his spot inside his clothes. I am sorry to interrupt you, but as all those involved have had a chance to talk, my friends wish for their voices to be heard as well. Akito unhooked the scroll strapped to his back, laid it out carefully on the wood. It wasn't hard to guess what it contained. Kai. In a puff of smoke, a crouched figure appeared, clad in bright, tacky colors. Their face was hidden by a mask, but not only could Sasuke recognize his chakra anywhere, he was familiar with the mask too. Always the same, the red waves, the monster, the number 9. Hello. I am here on behalf of the Jinhuriki. Sasuke didn't need to see his face to know Naruto. Zetsu's smile was now so wide it looked like his face had been sliced in half, pried open to look at what was inside. You have the nerves to present yourself to us, the Tsuchikage accused. Outrage was popping the veins on his forehead and he was very red. The effect was almost comical. We don't fear you. There was no way to know who Naruto was looking at, the face he was making, the thoughts racing through his mind. Akito went to perch on his shoulder and he turned an apologetic face to Sasuke. Say your piece then, the Mizukage said tightly. They were all playing casual but the tension was unmistakable, they just didn't know who they ought to attack first. The place was supposed to be heavily warded, supposed to be safe. Ah, that Zetsu thing was a mystery, but Naruto's intrusion wasn't. Sasuke had carried the fox right in. It was probably the plan from the start. He didn't even have it in himself to feel betrayed or hurt. It was just on par with the course at this point, right? Maybe Naruto didn't even recognize him. Naruto and his people, the runaways, the other Jinhuriki, they were right to try and follow what was going on, but how dared they? How dared he send his fox, come to Sasuke? Did he simply expect to be granted, did he have no doubt at all? It was so unfair. Sasuke didn't even have the right to his anger. Could he get mad at the young summon? What if he started to cry? Sasuke was tired. He shook his head, disdainful. What was he even thinking? This was not the point. He hated the pull Naruto had on his thoughts, how easily he made him forget everything else around them, how focused he couldn't help but be on the other boy. This was ridiculous. He needed to get it together. Naruto had the right to know the fate decided for him and his friends. Maybe they could prepare, or bargain, or hide. It wasn't as if Sasuke could be the one to bring them the news. We will fight anyone trying to come after us. The Akatsuki is a threat to our peace, and so they are our enemies. And if the villages wish it so, they can become our enemies too. Are you saying that we aren't for now? The Mizukage asked, not as scornful as Suzuki would have expected her to be. Her brash, impulsive attitude was at least partly for show, partly a ploy to make her look unreasonable. Dismissible as a worthy interlocutor, as a serious threat. She was much smarter and more calculating than she let on. We did what we had to do for our kind, no more. We will not declare war first. This is not what we want. What do you want then? Naruto turned to Tsunade. They had been somewhat close, in a way. Suzuki wondered if she understood him better than he did. Freedom. Peace. Tattoos on unscarred skin. No injury ever left a mark. Is that all? What else is there? Vengeance. The silence was heavy with unsaid protest and rebuttal. Even more when Naruto answered with an even voice, we are not like you. Do you expect us to just take your words for it? That you won't level your power against any of us, that you won't be subdued and used like you always were. Suzuki didn't need to see Naruto's face to know his expression this time, as he focused on the old Tsuchikage. He had seen it often enough, the wrapped-up fury, the raging fire, tightly contained yet obvious all the same. You are welcome to try and take us for yourself again if you want to. But be prepared for what will happen to your villages if you do. And that's what we should trust. We will not declare war first. So it would be on the villages if war did break out with the Jinchuriki. They wouldn't be above it, but they had to tread carefully these days. There were fewer shinobi, more civilians. There was prosperity in the land, progress, and peace. The nations might not follow. The people either. Especially against a seemingly harmless group of less than 10. The Jinchuriki's secret had been guarded well enough that it couldn't be harvested as motivation for war. Even in Konoha, if they were to proclaim a hunt for the Ninetales, they would just be met with outraged horror. The beast was gone from their wall, out of sight. It was all the villagers had ever wanted, why go after it now? Especially to bring it back? As long as they were concerned, Naruto no longer existed. And it was what he wanted, what he advocated for. The right to be ignored, forgotten, to be left alone. They couldn't justify going against that, except by admitting to their quest for more power and influence over the other nations. Which they might do. But things were changing. Had changed already. The cage couldn't just do as they pleased. There would be people to oppose them now. What about the last member of your little gang? Zetsu asked, voice grating like the sawing of a tree. You are still missing a Biju from Kumo, are you not? We'll welcome him if he wishes to join us. Like hell. Naruto's mask face didn't prevent him to convey haughty disdain to the Raikage's outburst. We'll free him if he needs to be. Is that a threat? Naruto deigned no answer. He didn't have the same goals as the people gathered here, he had no concern for their power struggles and precarious agreements. He had no concern for the consequences of his words and actions either. The Raikage's brother was a Jinchuriki and thus had a place by their side. If he wanted to take it, they would make it so, and that was it. Just like they had in Kiri. The rest, they didn't care. What does the Akatsuki want? The envoy might have sensed he wouldn't win this argument anyway. He was still smiling, but with his head tilted almost all the way, the curve was downward. The Akatsuki wants the Jinchuriki. And we will have them. Starting with this one. They tensed even more at the threat in his voice, but the man didn't move an inch, didn't even blink. Naruto was curled up around himself, ready to bolt, or strike. Zetsu was smiling, smiling. Did you think he would be safer here with you, Raikage? You should have left him behind your walls. There was a loud crash outside in the hall. In a blink, the man was gone. Chaos erupted in the room. Naruto puffed out, back to his scroll or having teleported away, no way to know. Suzuki couldn't focus on that. He had a mission, they had to get safely out of here. Fights had broken out all over the building, samurai and shinobi from the various delegations against what Suzuki recognized immediately as reanimated corpses, just like the ones they had encountered in Suna. Just like his father's brother. They have to be sealed, someone shouted, prompting a scramble for body scrolls and restraining chains. though that left the matter of beating them down enough to trap them. Which proved easy enough, wherever they came from, they weren't strong enough shinobi to rival against the cage and their guards. Though the corpses kept getting up, kept piecing their bodies back together, there was no way to defeat them for good. Further down the corridors, they stumbled upon a part of the building that was, simply gone. Blown to piece. In the middle of the rubble was the strange man from Kumo, the Raikage's brother, the Hakusabi. The one he shouldn't have brought. He was fighting against a member of the Akatsuki, a tall man with flaming hair, face pierced with metal and body donned with the clouded cloak of their organization. They were gone the next moment, out of the building, carving a destructive path down the mountain. The others followed suit, but before Sasuke could do the same, Gamekaki appeared in front of him, looking the same as he had last time, frantic, worried. Sasuke's heart lurched in his chest. Sakura sister needs help right now. The place was in chaos, everyone busy fighting, he didn't know where his teammates and master were. He decided it didn't matter. Sakura was in trouble, he needed to get to her. He followed Gamekaki's guidance, away from the heart of the fights, up into the nearby hills. He figured someone would have seen them, probably. He would send words later. They reached a large stone bridge, cut open in several places by the deep gashes of a sword. Specifically, a massive, dull sword, with the tip broken off, and whose users would sharpen it with her own chakra. Sakura was standing in the middle of the bridge. In front of her stood an Akatsuki woman, blue-haired and blue-eyed, face half hidden by her cloak, as was for all members of her group. Apart from the sword cut, the bridge was partly covered with paper. Cut in various forms, clinging to the stone and flying around in the air, innocuous but surely deadly, as they answered to the elegant moves of the woman's fingers. Sasuke didn't speak out, not wanting to distract his friend. They were both deeply focused on their fight anyway, running around the bridge. It was hard to say who had the upper hand, they both looked travel-weary and exhausted, which wasn't surprising, if they had chased after one another all the way from the land of rain. They were both hurt as well, he couldn't help but notice, cataloging the cuts and bruises, trying to evaluate the risks. Sakura was near her limit, but she had an iron will and a mind for bold strategy. She never wavered, never lost focus, and she remained accurate and efficient to the very end. The Sharingan could see through her displacement illusion when her opponent couldn't, not in time at least. The woman strode forward as Sakura moved to her back. A wide down arc of her sword ripped open the woman's back from shoulder to hip. She stumbled, dazed. Sasuke sped up down the hill, alerting Sakura with his careless footsteps. She smiled in relief when she spotted him, took a step in his direction. And then, a blossom. The paper flower bloomed in her chest, spurting from within, spitting blood all around her. It was intricate work, delicate and beautiful. Sharp and merciless. She stared at it in surprise, the elegant curls of the petals, the white mostly covered in red. She raised a hand to touch it, she collapsed on the ground before she could. Sasuke tripped over himself trying to reach her. He glanced anxiously at the Akatsuki woman, wanting to assess if she was still a threat, brain split in two between opposite instincts, of tending to Sakura immediately and dealing with the danger facing them still. The woman was trying to get back on her feet with no success, blood soaking through her clothes, her skin ashen and her body weakening. Before he could make up his mind to finish her, one of her companions appeared in a whirlwind. He looked disturbingly similar to Killer Bee's opponent back there, same hair and especially same eyes, purple and swirling, unlike anything Sasuke had ever encountered. They stared at each other for only a second, enough still for some form of understanding to pass between them. The man picked up his injured friend and left. Sasuke forgot about them and fell to his knees by Sakura's side. It was as if someone else took over in these situations. The boy who was panicking over the injuries of his dear friend took a backseat to the medic observing clinically an injury he had to treat. Life-threatening, absolute emergency. Open chest wound, severe blood loss. The heart wasn't hit, unlike the lungs, where the flower had bloomed. She coughed, struggling to breathe, but she couldn't tell him what she felt, as she had lost consciousness already. It was both better and not, hearing her in her pain would have made this harder, but her being able to speak would have been reassuring. He got to work as he assessed the damage, scanning, probing, his chakra spreading through her body. The Sharingan helped here, as it helped in all things, as it buried in the torn tissues and bloodied flesh, bringing up charts and diagrams to the forefront of his mind, where nerves and veins were supposed to be, what was compromised, what was maimed. The heart wasn't hit, yet it was under duress. She was in shock, and she had lost too much blood already. Sasuke worked fast, mending and fixing, mindless with urgency and fear. Time was always their enemy. They could repair everything given enough time, their chakra could heal any damage. But life had to remain within in the meantime, the heart had to keep pumping, the blood had to keep flowing. And often it wouldn't. Often the heart would give out and there was only so much life they could push in, only so much mechanism they could stimulate. Sasuke poured and poured, chakra flooding in, to heal the damage as fast as he could, to keep her organs going, to hold her life back down here with him. They weren't at the hospital, there was no extra blood, extra hands, extra chakra to help them along. They were the only two people alive in this world. He couldn't see anything, had no idea what was happening around him. How had they ended up here? Why were they fine just a few hours, a few minutes ago, and were fighting against death now? Why did it always come after them? Sasuke's father and his lifeless eyes assaulted his thoughts and he pushed him away mercilessly, cursing, praying. The world had narrowed to his two hands covered in his friend's blood, begging for her to hold on, to pull through. She had to, no matter what, nothing else mattered, she had to, this couldn't be happening, she couldn't just fucking die. Hold on, please, please, please. Her heart stopped beating. Chapter 19. Naruto had always wondered if he would feel it activate, if he would know. The answer was yes. Her heart stopped beating. It felt like Sasuke's did too. He was frozen in indecision. He needed to get it to beat again, but his hands were half buried in her torn open chest, he was pressing on wounds that would gush out gallons of blood if he let go, and she had lost so much already, and it would take too long to wait until he had patched her up enough, but she was going into cardiac arrest. He couldn't just ignore that. But then, a brief flash pulsed out of her chest, the telltale rush of a seal being activated. Her heart started beating again. Strong, perfectly steady. Sustained. There was nothing natural about its beating and Sasuke had enough experience, enough perception to understand why. He checked, just to be sure, but he didn't need the Sharingan to know what he would find wrapped around her heart, working the muscle, pumping in its stead. He could even recognize the handwriting, the brush stroke, the style. He already knew the seal was there anyway. Didn't he? Sakura woke up in a panic. She could barely open her eyes, she couldn't move, she wasn't even sure she was breathing. She had lost consciousness with her chest split open and her brain was still stuck on that, still on that bridge, trying to stop that woman and failing, sharply aware that one wrong move would mean defeat, that defeat would mean death. But she wasn't dead, was she? She managed to blink a few times and recognized a hospital room. She could even say which hospital, she was confident that the ugly flower pattern on the curtains was used in one place only. She was desperate to believe she was home. And she was blessed, for a second later her hopes were answered, when Sasuke entered the room and rushed to her side, springing into action to feed her some water, check her body and whatever injury she had sustained, and hold back pathetic sniffles. When he was reassured she was up and, she assumed, out of immediate danger, he pressed his forehead to hers and proceeded to cry his heart out. She didn't feel too awesome herself, so she let him stay there for a moment, and she maybe let slip a tear or two. She didn't know what had happened but she could guess, could feel it in her aching body and exhausted mind, that it had been bad, very bad. I'm guessing we don't have much time before I get swarmed with visitors, she whispered, dreading her parents' visit. Tell me what happened. He nodded and stood back up, trying to regain a bit of composure. He helped her into a mildly sitting position with a high stack of pillows. It felt like she had no muscle left in her body, or a spine for that matter. Her chest ached deeply and she was scared of what could be hiding under the thick bandages wrapped around her torso. She was in no hurry to hear about her medical condition, but she needed to know how she got there. Sasuke sat on the bed next to her and took one of her hands in his. He kept his focus on it, playing idly with her fingers as he gathered his thoughts. Even if she was worried about being interrupted by one of their friends or, Sage help her parents, there was no point in trying to rush him, with how shaken he was. Plus, the contact was rather comforting. You nearly died. Yeah, I figured. No, it's... I couldn't have saved you. Out there in the middle of nowhere, it was too much, I couldn't. Your heart couldn't handle it. It didn't. It gave out. She brought her other hand to her chest on instinct, hovering uncertainly above her wound. What would she find underneath? Was it even beating anymore? Was she dead after all? Then how? It was the seal. She blinked at him, confused. The seal made your heart beat again. It kept it going, even after I could heal you enough that you wouldn't. It's gone now. I guess it was a one-time use. Sasuke's grip had tightened around her hand. He was in pain, he was angry. She was speechless. Naruto had laid his seal on them both. The one he used to stop the hearts of his enemies. He had threatened them with it, warned them not to go after them or else. Naruto had saved Sakura's life. She was speechless. And then, she was enraged. That fucking little... She took a huge breath, beside herself with fury and outrage. How dare he? How dare he look after them? How dare he try to be protective now, and trick them, and... How dare he care about them so fiercely still, and lie about it in such a hurtful way? Sasuke had been devastated by the seal. She hadn't fared that much better. They would have left Naruto alone if he had just asked. There was no point, it had been so unnecessary, so mean. And that was it? What, he had to hide that he cared? Why? They never had. They never doubted either, before that anyway. Why care and push them away? And now she owed him her life. She had been saved by his love. She didn't know what to do with herself. We brought you back here once you were good enough to be moved. We had to operate again once we arrived, but you're safe now. You'll be sore for a while though, training will have to wait. Running too, to be honest. You. He couldn't further detail how fucked her body was because Ino burst into the room and jumped them both, which was probably for the best. Sakura had to bear the stream for quite a while, their friends and her family anxious to check on her, to welcome her back. It made her uncomfortable if she was honest. Sasuke had left to tend to his duties at the hospital. He only came back when she managed to be alone again, after making a show of falling asleep so that her mother would leave. It was bad whether she bought her poor performance or didn't and had left hurt and annoyed, but Sakura couldn't bear her fussing a moment longer. Sasuke was with Tsunade, so the fussing was hopefully over. How are you, Sakura? The woman asked, hiding her impatience decently. Sakura wasn't going to drag this out. She was as eager to get to the point. I feel fine. I'm ready to give my report. Tsunade visibly relaxed at that. It wouldn't last. You were called in by Jiraiya to assist him. Did you manage to reach him? She knew it wasn't a good idea, but she couldn't just stay sitting like this, half sprawled in her bed. Sasuke supported her when he saw her struggle to change position, though he didn't like it. She thanked him with a smile, glad that he would play along. He disapproved as her doctor, but he understood as her friend. She moved carefully but with purpose until she was kneeling on the bed. Tsunade watched her without a word. She had to know already. She ought to have guessed. Otherwise she would have said something. Sakura kneeled, hands on her thighs, face down. She took a deep breath that had no right to be so painful and did nothing to calm her. I followed his cues to the land of rain. I have reasons to believe it is a stronghold of the Akatsuki, and that they have a great hold on the whole country. The details would come later. She wished she had a body scroll to present to her, but there wasn't a body. She still had to say it. I was joined by one of my master's toads. They were with him when he entered Omegakure. They. Sakura bit her lips, fighting against the rise of her emotions. At her side, Sasuke was refraining from getting closer, from trying to offer touch and comfort. Even if this was a hospital room, she was reporting, and this was their commander. She had a duty to fulfill. He fought against several members of the Akatsuki. They eventually bested him, though he was able to leave a message with the toads before he. Breathing hurt, so she held it instead, until she could no longer delay. I returned my master Jiraiya to his village, she whispered in an exhale. There was no body. She couldn't risk venturing into AIM to find it, and Fukazaka had told her that it would be for naught. That the man was resting at the bottom of a pond now, where he would remain. Still, she was bringing him back. She was his student, and she bore the news of his death. She was bringing him back home with her, however little he cared for the concept, however few were the things keeping him attached here. She was bringing him back to his last and only friend. Sakura. Are you sure? It was rude of the woman to ask, close to insulting, as if Sakura could have said it casually. She didn't mind, how could she? No one wanted to believe such a thing. I returned my master Jiraiya to his village, she said again, meeting the woman's gaze straight on this time, hoping she wouldn't make her repeat it. She didn't. Tsunade closed her eyes, took one deep breath, and when she looked again, it was all gone. Tightly locked away, to be unleashed later, willingly, or not, once she was safe, away from prying eyes. For now, she was the Godame Hokage once more. I need your full report now, please. If you are up for it. She added the last part as an afterthought, probably not meaning it in the slightest. Sakura had no intention to make her wait anyway. So she started to recount what she could, mostly based on what Fukazaka had told her, as the old toad was with her master when he died. There was this man, Pain, and the vessels he could control, each a terrible foe. And there was the woman named Konan. Sakura had followed their trail out of AIM, but the woman had confronted her before she could reach the Land of Iron. All members of the Akatsuki, all powerful and deadly. Jiraiya also left a message. She had transcribed the series of numbers for fear that the toad's back would heal before they could come back to Konoha to pass it on. She didn't know what it meant, could only trust the intelligence department would know what to do with it. And he said he was sorry. He said he didn't have the time to make you a list of what he was sorry for, so you would have to guess. She could picture him, mumbling to the old toad as life deserted him. He had no word for Sakura, of course. Might not have remembered her at all in the end. She had not made that much of an impact, had she? She couldn't even cry over him. I see. Thank you. Put that all in writing and get well. We'll talk about this again. I'll. The woman drifted off then, lost on what she should do next. There were a million things probably, but now grief had come uninvited, messing up the schedule. Sakura felt sorrier for her than she did for herself. Tsunade left without another word, Sakura forgotten already. She thought Sasuke would follow suit, but he lingered, looking concerned. Are you alright? She shrugged. I'm fine. We weren't that close, right? He wasn't even a good teacher. She was surprised at the hitch, at her throat tightening around a sob, painful suddenly. She wiped her face hastily. This was ridiculous. She didn't even like the guy. He was an idiot and perverted to boot, always thinking about money, alcohol, and women. Unreliable, crude, noisy. Unable to mind his own business, always listening to anyone's random sob stories and accepting any stupid jobs coming their way. He didn't even teach me half of the things he said he would. And so she cried after all. What else was she supposed to do? Her master had died. That old fucker had gone and gotten himself killed like a moron. Fuck. Sasuke hugged her to his chest and he didn't say anything because he was nice like that, because he knew her to her core, better than anyone. I'm okay, she kept mumbling, until finally it was true and she could get back a semblance of control over her all over the place emotions. And because she was still embarrassed and raw, and because it was easier to worry about others than herself, she asked in turn, and you? You okay? He couldn't be, after everything. And he had to know she could tell. He lied still. I am. Don't worry about me. Get better, okay? Listen to the nurses. Why, you won't be here to pester me. I'm going out on a mission. Kumo requested our help. The way he said the word requested, Sakura had a feeling it wasn't too polite a demand. Really? For what? The Akatsuki took the host of the Eight Tails. Tsunade didn't get how she could possibly have so many things to do in one day, every single day. It wasn't for lack of delegating to any poor sod she could find to handle her work in her place, so why did she still have so much to do? She didn't remember the old man working that hard. Then again, she didn't remember him ever leaving his office in the Hokage Tower after he became Sandaime, to the point that there was a rumor among the kids that he actually lived up there and couldn't leave. For Tsunade, a minute in the office was a minute too much. She had even taken to reading and signing paperwork while walking around, just so that Shizun would stop trying to lock her up inside. She visited the various departments as often as possible, to get reports or supervise their work or just breathe down their necks so that they didn't get too complacent. She knew for a fact Yamanaka Inoichi had put his staff up to running interference so that she wouldn't stick around, and it had also spurred a new kind of solidarity at the Konoha police, between the Uchiha and the shinobi working with them. It was her very own way of boosting inter-clan relationships and sense of community. Or whatever. Better to say that, than admit how she hated everything about this life. And now Jiraiya was gone. He was gone. She stopped in the middle of the conversation she was having with the head nurse. Maybe in the middle of a sentence. Powering through had seemed like the best option, when Sakura had delivered the news, because Tsunade didn't know what to do. She had no one to share her grief with. No one to turn to. Jiraiya was dead. She was alone. She was the last one left. Hokage-sama. Sorry, what were you saying? She moved down the list. Draft an answer to the daimyo and his inane demands. Visit the construction site of the new gymnasium near the East Gate. Sign Inuyasukatsume's request for additional funds for the tending of the horses. She moved to the bottom of the list the review on a new means of transportation, with wheels and a powering engine on board, figuring she wouldn't have the mental capacity just then. Right back to the Mizukage. Read the latest reports from the intelligence network. Plan Jiraiya's funeral. Tsunade stared at the list. When did you add this? She hated the look on Shizun's face, so kind, so indulgent. I figured you wouldn't want someone else to take care of it. Why? Because it's a duty of the Hokage. Was that all it was, an item on the list? Was she supposed to treat it as such? Would she bury the Sannin Jiraiya because she was the Godame Hokage of Konoha, and he was an esteemed fighter of her turf? I wasn't sure you would get to it otherwise. It was offensive, how well Shizun knew her. She wanted to get angry. She wanted to rage and rave, to throw things across the room, to spill ink all over the paper scattered on her desk. To punch a wall open, turn the place to dust. She did none of it. She didn't have the energy, the strength. Jiraiya was dead, and she wasn't. What else was there to say, to do? You do it. Tsunade. Leave. For the very first time, Shizun didn't argue against that. Tsunade ought to lose a close friend more often. But she didn't have any left. Bugger. Plan his funerals, on top of everything? She wasn't even sure she would attend. Was he dead, even? He wouldn't be above faking it to have some peace and coming back in 3 years smiling like the asshole he was with a half-assed explanation and no apology. The look on Sakura's face, when she had asked if she was sure. As if she wouldn't be. As if she would lie, or affirm without knowing for sure, or make that kind of horrible joke. As if life made gifts such as those, took death back after a fright. As if Tsunade was ever so lucky. She knew his death had nothing to do with her. It felt like it anyway. She couldn't believe it. Decades they had spent apart, completely unaware and uncaring of each other. But he had to die now. Now that they were doing better, now that they were starting to move on, to forgive each other, to make amends. Now that she needed him, now, he died. Just like that. At the hand of those filthy brats from AIM, no less. The irony was too good. Jiraiya was dead. Her closest friend. The only remaining person who knew her in this world. Except there was one other left. She wondered how Orochimaru would deal with this news. Maybe he knew already, maybe he was in on it even. Was he satisfied, relieved? Was he sad? Did he care at all? She wanted to see him. How absurd, how terrible of her, yet that was all she wished for at that moment. Alone in the Hokage office, well on her way to see the bottom of that bottle of sake and determined to see the next one too, she wanted to see her friend. She wanted to grieve and reminisce with him, to laugh at their past antic, to cry at what would never come to pass now. She wanted to not think about how Orochimaru was on the side of their teammates' killers. How many people could she lose, really? How many losses could she bear? Was it endless? Losing and losing more and more until the day you died? Couldn't she have at least gained a few things in turn? No, no. That only meant even more to lose later on. She would know. Surely she would reach a point where there was nothing more to be taken from her. Surely she would find some peace then. The alcohol wasn't doing it for her the way it used to. Maybe she had cut down too much, maybe she was too used to it. Or maybe there wasn't a strong enough spirit in this world to match the pain drilling a hole in her chest. She jumped out of the office and set course to the forest. Maybe she could just leave. She had before. She could leave it all behind, forget about that forsaken place and its needy people. She realized where her drunken wandering had led her only when she stumbled upon the place. It had to be the thought of running away. She had come straight to their secret spot. The one where she had taught Naruto summons. She envied him, sometimes. And then she remembered that he had not truly wanted to leave. He had been driven away. She could argue she had been too, but that would have been too hypocritical, even for her. Too dismissive of his pain. He would have stayed, had it been bearable for him to do so. Jiraiya had been rather unbothered by the whole thing. Whether he thought it was just childish rebellion, or was justified enough that they shouldn't interfere, she couldn't say. He had not wanted to discuss at all the fate of his favorite disciple's son, how he had been cast aside and abandoned, by everyone in the village but by Jiraiya first and foremost. Tsunade had never met Namikaze Minato, but it was hard to believe he was as bright as they all said he was, if he had trusted Jiraiya of all people with his child. Jiraiya, and the Sandaime. What a foolish man. Tsunade was determined never to inspire this kind of trust from anyone under her command. Let them know they couldn't follow her blindly, let them know they couldn't trust her to handle anything on her own. Let them challenge her at every turn, until they realized a leader was little more than a mediator, a planner. They couldn't rely on it to guide them, to make the right choice every time. Every person was more foolish than the next, and Kage were no exception. Jiraiya was no exception at all. Foolish, foolish. Dead now. She had never refrained from cursing the dead. It was the least they could bear, now that they were gone and she alone remained. It would have been rich of her friend to expect reverence and dignity from her now, when he had left her side so cruelly. Tsunade lay on the damp grass, under the small tier through the canopy that allowed the night sky to peek through. As the village grew larger, more populated and animated, the light got brighter, denser, and the star faded in their glow. She was far from the heart of it, yet not that far. Even if she couldn't hear nor see it, she knew it was there, close and inescapable. Tsunade cried the death of her friend then, the way she had cried for every loved one lost, no wiser, no more dignified, no better prepared. She cried as she went down the list in her head. Hear the head engineer about the state of the water system. Review the latest mission orders and reports. Visit the Uchiha clan about the ongoing succession. Plan Jiraiya's funeral. They searched and searched, but they couldn't find any traces of him anywhere. They had never not been aware of each other. From the very start, even if it was distant, a barely there feeling, even if they couldn't reach out, they had a sense that the others were there, somewhere, on the edge of their consciousness. But the Hakabi and his host were nowhere at all. The Biju assured that he wasn't dead, that they would know. How then? Where could they be? Akito said that the man in the orange mask had not teleported away. He went elsewhere. Elsewhere. Like we do when we go to Mount Inari. Kinajutsu do that. It was unheard of. Teleportation and displacing jutsu were a thing, albeit a rare one, but what, changing dimension? On their own, without the help of a summon? The how didn't matter anyway. Killer Bee was unreachable. We have to keep looking. They will surface again eventually. They agreed, even if they couldn't even have faith in that for sure. But they were helpless for now. And even if they did, we can't just run blindly into the Akatsuki's clutches. They were going to need help this time. The boss had demanded that the other villages help with the search for B. Karui was sure they would refuse, and honestly, they would have been justified. He said it would be a show of good faith, to work for this alliance you want so much. Never be it said that he was a good diplomat. But Konoha and Suna agreed anyway, to lend some forces at least, to assign some of their shinobi to the task. Karui was grateful to the point of feeling ill at ease. She didn't get why the two Kage would even go along with it. She couldn't believe they were sincere in their expressed will to work for better relationships between their villages and nations, and to side with the Jinhiriki. It was too good to be true. Their team Samui thus gained a taciturn kid from Konoha, with dark hair and dark eyes, who seemed to be an assistant of the Godame Hokage. One of them Uchiha, Samui said, though it meant little to Karui. He wasn't very talkative, though he was polite at least. Whatever. She didn't intend to make a friend out of him. She just wanted them to get B back. They couldn't lose him too. Although she knew very well that Yujito had not been taken against her will. No matter how the boss tried to spin it. Yujito was strong, she was unyielding, and they had to face the truth, none of the hosts had been taken against their will. There was no struggle, no fight. They had come to her with an offer, and she had taken it, not looking back. Karui knew it was unfair to resent her. She did anyway. B had said no at least. But that was unfair too, they weren't the same. Yujito never expressed any grievance, she never complained about anything, and she never talked about her childhood. Karui had heard stories though. B was a young teen when he became a Jinhiriki, and the boss doted on him like an old aunt. Yujito had been too. The training B had completed after years, she had already gone through it all before she was 10. But there was no choice, right? The tailed beasts were a threat, they had to ensure they were under proper control. In Kumo they weren't stupid enough to mistreat the Jinhiriki like they did in the other villages, they were revered and respected as they should be, for the sacrifice they had made, for the protection and strength they ensured. Yujito didn't have it so bad. She still left. She left them all behind. They were so sure she wouldn't. When news had reached Kumo about the deserting Jinhiriki from Konoha and Suna, the boss had gone to see Yujito, just to be clear on what was happening. Karui thought it was unnecessary because obviously, Yujito wouldn't leave. You're not like them, she had said confidently to the older woman, once the Raikage was gone. Yujito's face had not changed. She never showed anything. I'm exactly like them, she had answered, and then, low enough that Karui could pretend she didn't hear, I was sacrificed the same. No you weren't, and then, since she was being stubborn, we all make sacrifices. She had gotten angry after that, like Karui had never seen her. Though she had still looked calm, composed. It was in her tone, in her eyes. So furious, so cold. Why is that? What did it accomplish? Tell me, Karui. What did we get in exchange? What did I get? We still went to war. We kept on dying. All my sisters were lost. And for what? Yujito didn't have any siblings. Karui had left. She had kept it to herself, had not told anyone. Because Yujito wouldn't leave. Karui felt pretty stupid now. They were following some tenuous lead on members of the Akatsuki's whereabouts, not too far from Konoha when the Uchiha decided that he wanted to talk after all. You seem to care a lot about this man. Samui was too private a person to answer, and Amwa couldn't be trusted with not saying anything dumb. Karui begrudgingly opted to be the boy's interlocutor. Though leaving him hanging was tempting too, it would be unnecessarily rude, and Karui didn't want to give less than a stellar image of the shinobi of Kumo. Of course. B is a mentor and a friend, he is one of us. The boy pondered over the answer for a while, weirdly serious for what ought to be a rather casual conversation. What about the other one? The other Jinhiriki. And there went Karui's sympathy. She should have ignored him from the start. But when she turned to him to rebuff him, he didn't look malicious nor smug. He was deep in thought, grappling with his own reflections. What about her? Karui asked tightly, willing herself to be patient, to give him the benefit of the doubt. She had to remind herself that he was helping. He had not even looked annoyed with it. She could make an effort. Was she treated the same? Why do you ask? I'm wondering. She left, didn't she? That was it, he had to be reeling her up on purpose, right? She glared at him. He frowned, puzzled. Sorry. I didn't mean to be rude. She didn't get this kid. They had different circumstances. But we didn't shun her or anything. The like you did was pretty obvious in the tense silence that followed. That got the boy moody after all. She still left. She was going to punch him. What are you getting at? I guess it's reassuring, in a way. What? That she would still want to get free. Do you think you're off the hook for the Kua by escaping your village then? Do you think you're not at fault? He was taken aback by the venom in her tone and she almost felt bad at the flash of hurt and guilt that passed on his face, but she was too pissed to back down. They were at fault, all of them, as much as that fucking Akatsuki. They wouldn't be in this mess, with all the Jinhiriki scattered in the wind and vulnerable, with B in harm's way, if they had taken better care of their own, if they had been able to hold them back. Konoha in particular had no lesson to give, wasn't theirs the first? That Naruto, who even had the nerve to show up at the summit, wasn't he the one who had collected them, one by one? What did Konoha do to him that he was so eager to rise against them? I let my friend go, he said. She meant to ask, wasn't that treason, but Samui called out her name strictly, and Karui kept her mouth shut. Did he think he had the moral high ground anyway? Good for him, but they weren't the same. B had been taken, and they would be the ones to find him and bring him home. She avoided thinking about what would happen if the rogue Jinhiriki got to him first. She avoided thinking about Yujito. During their rather tense lunch break, they were visited by a summon. A dressed-up fox, looking young but solemn, as it stood in front of the Uchiha. They stared for a moment before the summon dared to speak. I'm sorry. The teen shrugged, making a spectacularly terrible job at appearing unaffected. It was honestly embarrassing. I needed to get past the wards. It was my idea. He didn't ask me to do it, like this. I did want to see you. It was rare to see summons grovel in such a way. They were usually prideful and insensitive, too far removed from earthly concern to care for the trials of the human world. Kyumo didn't deal much with summons. Too volatile. Do you need something, Akito? Karui focused back on her food. This was none of her business after all. I am relaying a proposition. They know where the missing man is held captive. Granted certain conditions, they will tell. It was totally her business after all. She jumped to her feet in tandem with her two teammates and stalked toward the fox. What did you say? The Uchiha wasn't as mad as he had tried to appear with the summon, for he scooped it in his arms without question when it jumped on him out of fright. My friends want to negotiate, the fox said, making a visible effort to talk through its wariness. What a useless summon. They didn't have time for rambling. Tell me where he is. She made to advance, uncaring of what she would need to do to pull the information out of it, but she was stopped in her tracks by a new arrival. A much bigger one. This fox was almost as tall as her on its four paws, and it glared at her coldly. Know your place, human. Akira. The newcomer turned to the other fox. What's the point of taking it upon yourself if you can't see it through, Akito? The young fox looked sheepish, but not discouraged. I do not want to fight. Karui and this Akira were in agreement over the derisive sigh it pulled out of them both. Our contract and his people wish to exchange with your leaders. Either arrange it, or do without their intel. Samui stepped in before Karui gave in to her urge to fight this one too. We'll arrange it immediately, she said as she summoned a messaging crow from a scroll. Out of the corner of her eye, Karui saw the Uchiha deliberately do the same. They were closer to Konoha. The Hokage would know first. The fox growled but settled, pacified. I won't let you go next time if this is how it goes, Akito. Mother said I could, it's not up to you. The fox chose to fade out instead of addressing that. The other one stayed in the Uchiha's hold, stubborn still. Karui couldn't believe they were indulging in these petty squabbles when they were so close to finding B at last. What is the message then? We will lead you to the host of the Eight Tails, if we can trust there won't be an attempt against us. The fox looked proud for reciting it. Is that all? The Uchiha asked. The foxes had talked to him mostly, they seemed to be acquainted at least. That wasn't very loyal to Karui's eyes, and it could be a useful thing to know later. The messages went by fast, thanks the sage. This was largely for show, there was no guarantee either cage could give, no word they couldn't easily betray, and the Jinhuriki had to know that. And still, they had reached out. They said it was because they didn't want to engage the Akatsuki on their own, and that was smart on their part, but they couldn't pretend to trust the villages. Were they just using them, intending to stay away and snatch B at the last moment? It was possible. They would need to be on guard. Of course, there was also the possibility that this could be a trap. From the Jinhuriki, from the Akatsuki, from both, in tandem or not. Wouldn't that be fucking fantastic? They had to go anyway. They had to try. They followed the summon through the woods of the Land of Fire. It was obvious he had come to the Uchiha, that the boy was the reason why they were even able to make the connection. Was it of no concern to his cage, that he was so chummy with the Jinhuriki? Once they had B back, this would need to be addressed. If Konoha had been in contact with the rogue hosts all this time. Karui had to put these thoughts out of her mind quickly, because they heard the fight long before the fox had made any indication that they were close by. They stumbled upon utter chaos. There were the Akatsuki in their stupid coat, the Jinhuriki in their stupid mask. A bunch of zombies, from what Karui could infer, the same nuisance they had to deal with at the summit, pretty weak but so damn relentless, unstoppable unless buried under binding seals. And at the center of it all, there was a half-collapsed hideout, and B trapped in a barrier. One of these fuckers of the Akatsuki was sitting casually on top of the cage, relaxed as if they were chilling on a park bench. That their face was hidden under an ugly orange mask didn't make it less punchable in Karui's opinion. She was going to kick his ass. If she could reach him. Reinforcement arrived, but it only added to the confusion. They were at a disadvantage because the zombies were shinobi too. They dressed the same, they even had their headband. What was up with that? Once again Konoha had known back then, they were the ones to instruct the rest on how to get rid of them. How did they even know? It was suspicious as hell. Karui focused on reaching B. She couldn't help her fellow shinobi for now, even if they struggled against their dead enemies, more powerful than last time. She couldn't get distracted, couldn't stray. They were here to rescue B, that was their sole purpose. Yujito wasn't there, she couldn't help but notice. There were 4 people from their little gang, faces hidden by smooth white masks, wreaking havoc among the enemy's ranks. Or their own. She came face to face with a short man with red hair, and she felt like he was eager to fight her. But he went back to the corpses, to clearing a path toward B and his cage. She took advantage of his power of destruction, wondering what would happen if the Jinhuriki decided to turn on the villages next. They had the power to destroy them all. Had it from the start, really, and it was pretty absurd that they had never realized it before, never seized it. It had seemed so unbelievable that Yujito would even leave. When thinking about it, what was incomprehensible was the opposite. That it took them so long. That they didn't try this sooner. They would need to be stopped too, one way or another. Karui cared little for their strength, they were a threat, always would be. Was that what the boss feared as well? That B would be lumped with the rest when the villages inevitably decided to do away with them? Did he believe they should be the exception? The ones who wouldn't make the sacrifice? How ironic. She thought she understood Yujito a little more. B was her friend and Yujito was too, even if she didn't believe it anymore. Karui wished them no harm. And yet, it seemed an eternity when it wasn't even a few hours, but fighting always felt that way. Endless, hopeless. Well, when they were losing. And they weren't, not really, but they weren't winning either because their goal was still out of reach. Until at last she managed to approach the barrier and the orange mask. The swirling face turned to her for a moment, assessing, its owner still infuriating in their carelessness and cheer, as if all of this was just for show, a great amusement. Karui took a step forward, gearing up for a fight. The next moment, they were gone. Disappeared into thin air. She couldn't sense them anywhere, they had not teleported away, they were just fucking gone. She screamed in murderous rage. The other members of the Akatsuki followed. Karui looked around, mindless with fury, wondering which they ought to tail, what to do next. The answer was immediately clear. The fight was over, and they needed to tend to the wounded. She had not noticed how many had come to fight, how many enemies they had faced, and how much damage had been done. It was so enraging. They had done little to no harm to the Akatsuki themselves. This was a complete waste, they had failed entirely, and only had losses to show for it. She wanted to strangle someone, all her pent-up energy wasted now that the enemy was gone. She wanted to fight still, but for now she had to help. Karui tried to find the Uchiha, who was a medic and could be useful at least if he had had the good sense not to get hurt himself. Her comrades were hurt, they needed help. It was his job to help. But he was nowhere to be seen. And neither were the Jinhiriki. Sasuke understood it was hopeless the moment he saw the man called Toby guarding Killer Bee. He knew what the man could do. It was a bait, one they couldn't hope to snatch, no matter their number and strength. The man could vanish away at a moment's notice, and he would no doubt do so as soon as any shinobi got just a little too close for his taste. The Jinhiriki would follow suit, and they would all be back on square one. But not this time. Not this time. Naruto wasn't there, nor was Neji. There was one Sasuke recognized though, despite her mask, the girl with the red hair, the one that had come to Gaara's rescue. The one that was good at barriers and teleportation seals. Sasuke kept his focus solely on her. He barely paid any mind to the corpses he had to fend off, he very deliberately put the man in the orange mask out of his mind. It was a bait, it was pointless. Sasuke couldn't fight him, not now, it wasn't what was important now. He had been thinking of one thing only, ever since Akito had appeared before him once more, and even before, from the very second he had understood what was happening in Sakura's chest, where that light came from. He had had enough of waiting and wondering, of feeling adrift and untethered. He bid his time, waiting for the fight to end, for them to retreat once again. And when Toby vanished with Killer Bee, as he was wont to do from the start, Sasuke ignored the commotion in favor of closing the distance between him and the girl, who was already tuning tail, already gathering her companions to flee. She flinched in recognition as their gaze met, ever so briefly, through the slants of her mask. He needed no more. Karen didn't exactly panic when she recognized the Uchiha boy, when he recognized her. But she didn't trust that he wouldn't make her life much harder than it already was. Their rescue attempt had failed, as they knew it would. They still had to try, with all their might, going as far as reaching out to the villages and sharing what they knew, because they couldn't leave a Jinhiriki in the Akatsuki's clutches. Of course it was a trap. Of course it didn't work out. Karen had to drag Fu away, had to threaten Suijutsu to abandon him there, had to yell at Rashi even, so that they would join her back, so that she could lead them to safety. Naruto wasn't there, he was in charge of the other group that was chasing the other lead, the other place where the Jinhiriki had pinpointed the presence of their last member, unable to tell for sure which was the right one because this was a trap. She had learned to operate his seal. She had to carry the group away from this place, before the shinobi, bereft of their initial target, turned to them next. She made sure they weren't followed. No one was tailing them. She thought she felt something. But they had to hurry, there was no time to waste. If they reached the first seal, they would be safe. She touched the tip of her fingers to the paper seal, carefully hidden in the foliage of a tree, her friends holding tightly onto her arms. She jumped. And jumped, and jumped, dragging them all from seal to seal, not as fast as Naruto could but plenty fast all the same. They scattered the seal in their wake as they moved through the countries, spaced carefully to the limit of the seal's range. They could cross hundreds of miles in this way. Some seals disappeared, of course, got destroyed or altered, but as long as they were far enough, lost enough, it wasn't too high a risk. There was no hitch this time. She managed to pull them all the way to the temple, All 5 of them. All 4 of them. All 4. It was 4 of them. It was. Karen blinked in the sudden light of the open ground of the temple, staring dumbly at their group. Each bore the jumps with more or less grace, and they always needed a moment to steady themselves. They were bent on their knees, trying to catch their breath. 4 of them. Phew, Rashi, Suijitsu, and... She heard the others rush to meet them, inquiring about their state with worried voices that soon died down as they too contemplated the utter mess that they had just found themselves into. This time Karen couldn't even rage on, this was on her. It was her fault. Naruto came to stand by her side and she was tempted to send him away, just so that he wouldn't know, wouldn't see. It would be useless. He might have known before making his way to them. It was pathetic, really. What the hell? Karen. Niji accused, and she bit back a scorching retort because he was well within his right to scold her. She had been tricked, a genjutsu, no doubt, she had been too rushed, not careful enough. And she had brought Uchiha fucking Sasuke back with them. Chapter 20. Try as they might, they couldn't say for sure which way to go. Couldn't say where Killer Bee was held. It had to be a trap, a trick, a bait, for the man couldn't very well be in 2 places at the same time. Yet that was how it felt, and even the Biju couldn't tell the 2 apart. It was decided they would split, to check both locations. It was also decided that they would enroll the help of the villages. They owed them this, at least. Maybe they would bring enough manpower that they could wrestle Killer Bee from the Akatsuki's clutches. The chances were slim, but they had to try. Someone had to stay behind and look after Jin though. Yujito volunteered immediately. She volunteered, so that the others wouldn't have to go through the hassle of suggesting it themselves. Or worse, if they didn't dare, or didn't think to, and only realized their mistake when they stumbled upon the shinobi of Kumo, and she didn't know what she would do. She volunteered to stay behind because she didn't know. Naruto had told the cage, had told A, that they would rescue Killer Bee if that was what he needed, that they would bring him back here if that was what he wanted. She disagreed with this on all accounts. She believed they should have forced him to come, whether he liked it or not. And she absolutely loathed that he would come at all. They needed to be together, she understood this. She also understood that he was one of them. Yet she couldn't bear it. More so now that she had gotten to know the other Jinhiriki, that they had shared their stories and past. It wasn't even that he had had it better than most. It was a good thing if some had suffered less, she had come to terms with that. They ought to be grateful for any reprieve, to any of them. But Killer Bee didn't care. Even now, she was sure he wouldn't. He didn't care about the suffering of others. He didn't care that it was unfair. He was content with how things were, and so he wouldn't concern himself with any of it. After all, he had never spared a thought toward her. When he could have spoken out, from his place by the Raikage's side, he could have helped her. He didn't. He didn't care. He didn't care about them being weapons, he didn't care about what they had to do. He didn't have to worry about losing it, the Raikage was his guardian, he could handle his Biju. She wasn't so lucky. Besides, what good would it do to them? Kumo would never let him go. They could spare her, but B? No, never. Jin expressed great distress at seeing them all go, and Suijitsu had to spend a significant amount of time comforting the child until they could leave without triggering a fresh wave of screaming and crying. The young man was her favorite and he gave back well, as surprising as it was. Yujito, for her part, was ill-equipped to console a child, and they had interacted very little since her arrival at the temple. Children made her uncomfortable as a rule. She had, arguably, never been a child herself, nor had she interacted with any children at any age. Her only companions growing up were her instructors and the group of girls trained up alongside her, whom she would come to see as companions, and then as sisters, up until she discovered what their true purpose was. They had trained every day of their life for as long as their memory went. Up until they were gone. From what they could infer, Jin had been burdened with the Sanbai 3 or 4 years ago, and had been imprisoned ever since. It was hard to determine the child's age, so little and frail as she was, but they estimated between 8 and 10. She had no memory other than the cell. Yujito cleared for the 10th time that morning the dirt that Jin was intent on shoving into her mouth, and not for the first time. She had to wrestle down a rise of incandescent rage trying to take over her whole body. It drove her insane, that they had been made to live like this. That everyone had agreed, no one had said a thing. That so many people, all of them really, were fine with sacrificing a child for the supremacy of their insignificant corner of the world. The one thing where they were all in agreement with. That it was worth it. Worth their life, their fate, worth all their pain. Jin yelped in surprise when Yujito unthinkingly tightened her grip around her small hands. She let go with a start, appalled at her own lack of care. Jin looked up at her with big, wet eyes. "Don't be mad," she pleaded. "That wasn't so easily done. I'm sorry. I'm not mad at you." The child was gentle and sweet, easily pleased and undemanding. She was closer to a toddler on behavior alone, which wasn't so surprising, as she probably didn't receive much of an education of any sort while she was held in captivity. She couldn't read or write, and she had difficulties speaking too. Though she sang very well. "Manjiro taught me," she had said. She had not asked after her caretaker. It was hard to know if she truly understood what happened to him. The morning passed slowly. Yujito was surprised at how lonely she felt. She had gotten so used to the bustling and buzzing of the temple, to the coming and going of one teenager or another. With the addition of Rashi and Han, she had discovered the simple pleasure of sharing a drink late in the night, sitting on the terrace, talking about all matters of life. There was joy in this life, peace and contentment. All foreign. All cherished. She was also worried, though she thankfully could keep a measure of link with the others through the connection of the Biju. She wouldn't risk trying to contact them, lest she distracted them in the middle of a fight, but just reaching through their bond at least told her that they were okay. Killer Bee was there too. Muted, because they had never bonded in this way. They should have, no? But they were barely aware of each other. Or, he was barely aware of her. She was all too knowing. The first group came back a little worse for wear, a little bruised, after a brush with the Akatsuki and their corpses that ended up being for naught, and she was relieved. The second group came back the same, and she was relieved too. Up until she realized there was an intruder among them. She scooped Jin into her arms, ready to get the child out of there, but the newcomer didn't seem intent on attacking them. It was a teenager, as if there weren't enough of those running around. A black-haired boy from Konoha. She couldn't believe she was able to recognize him. "Sasuke?" Naruto whispered, incredulous, at her side. Well, damn. Sasuke needed a moment to adjust because his body didn't comprehend what had just happened to them. They had jumped through some seals if he had to guess. It was rather jarring. He needed a moment longer to catch up on the fact that his half-baked plan had worked. By that time, the people around him had recovered from the surprise as well. He found himself threatened with various weapons. "I mean no harm," he said on reflex, hands raised, trying to look inoffensive. He had not thought further than when he would make it here, among the Jinhiriki. No further than when he would cross Naruto's gaze. For some reason his imagination couldn't get past that moment. Real life sure could though. "You bastard, you tricked me." The girl barely refrained from punching him, he could tell. Or maybe it wasn't self-restraint but the tall guy holding her by the waist as she trashed around. Huh. Who knew? What did you do? "I'm good at genjutsu." It might have come out a little too pedantic for the situation he was in. But it was the truth, he was good at genjutsu, and it wasn't so hard to trick her mind into seeing empty air where he stood, into ignoring the fourth grip on her arm. Someone snorted, a guy with white hair, sharp teeth. The girl forgot about Sasuke in favor of chasing him around, screaming murder. They weren't as tense as they should have been, given the situation at hand. He ought to be relieved that they didn't consider him much of a threat, but it was unwise on their part. And maybe a bit vexing too. "I suppose there's no need to tie him up," a blonde woman said, older than the rest and whose stern expression was somewhat diminished by the small child bundled in her arms. "We'll deal with that later." "What happened out there?" They started a rather chaotic recounting of the events of the day and their failed rescue attempt and went on to argue about what to do next. Naruto was standing as far from Sasuke as possible, and he was careful never to look in his direction. Sasuke would know, he couldn't tear his eyes away. The only one to pay attention to him was a girl a little younger than him, with bright orange eyes and hair of violent blue-green. She had a wide smile on her face as she approached him as one would a new and weird-looking pet. "I'm Fu, from Takigakure. It's nice to meet you after all, Uchiha Sasuke." "Hi," he said awkwardly, disarmed by her friendly tone. He had expected some measures of hostility, but it seemed the ones who were the weariest of him were the ones who know him enough to be aware he was no threat to them. "How do you know my name?" "From Naruto, of course. He talked about you often." "Neji too, a bit, but not nearly as nicely." Sasuke had no idea what to do with this information. He had assumed Naruto would be tight-lipped about his life before this, that he wouldn't let them in, even in this way. He couldn't say for sure it was a comfort. What was the point in being cherished in secret if he was scornful to their face? "This place is guarded and you can't go out if the foxes don't want you to, so you're stuck here for now. Do you want a tour?" Was this a normal occurrence? Did they receive daily visits like this, that it would leave them so unfazed? Sasuke should have tried that sooner. Naruto was still avoiding eye contact, but Sasuke could say he was pissed. Good. He had no idea what was coming. Sure. The girl was funny and energetic, carefree despite the glare her enthusiastic tour guide show was gathering. Sasuke thought he would find it exhausting, but the levity was refreshing. He felt a little out of it, couldn't quite believe that he was here, that this was real. It felt like a parallel world, an interlude. The rest of the world was gone. This was also a reprieve. The others were still looking for their missing companion, mostly through their telepathic bond, if Sasuke had understood correctly. As such, Fu was saddled with babysitting duty, which she immediately dumped on Sasuke. He found himself in the care of a small child. This wasn't how he expected his day to go. Jin seemed content to walk around the temple in his arms, enjoying the tour as if getting it for the first time. Sasuke couldn't deny it was a beautiful place, warm and peaceful. The trees and plants were luxurious, colors and scents vivid like he rarely saw now that the forest around Konoha got thinner and more populated. There was a jumping stream down the temple, fresh and thin, not too far from its streaming point. He briefly tried to orient himself, to try and guess where they could be, before giving up. Jin liked the water, content to splash around and they could just watch and wait, idols. Sasuke ought to be annoyed. He chose not to. He was very tired. They were about to go back up when Naruto found them near the bank. "Fu, go take my place. We're still looking." It didn't give the impression that she was obeying him. In fact, he wasn't really asking, there was a pleading edge to his voice, a bargain for her compliance. She took Jin with her with a cheerful smile. They remained alone by the singing water. Sasuke couldn't pretend this was unusual, it was always terribly hard for them to talk. For Naruto, it seemed like each word was forcefully pulled from his mouth against his will, breaking through skin and teeth, leaving him open and bleeding. For Sasuke they just tumbled out with no rhythm nor rhyme, thoughts confused and speech even more so. Too much to feel, too much to say, not enough words to say it. They had the hardest time understanding each other. They kept trying and trying. They had never talked as much as that last time in the valley, each painful confession wrestled out, desperate to be heard, to be received well. Clumsy words, fragile words. "Please handle them with care. Please don't throw them back at me." This too, they were rather bad at. Eventually, Naruto spoke. "Why did you come here?" he asked. He sounded angry. Sasuke could have made a bet on what his first words would be, and win. Sasuke could have made a bet on what emotion would show up first, and win. Naruto often was within his right to be angry with him, and Sasuke still wished he wasn't. For once that he would be forgiving and indulgent, as Sasuke couldn't help to be. Even this time, he wasn't sure if he would manage to get angry. Though he was. Don't you know? He had to. And he did, judging by the way he avoided Sasuke's gaze, the way he kicked at a rock to send it tumbling into the water, the way his anger was more restlessness and worry than anything else. Sasuke was weak to his distress. "Sakura is fine," he said. "She made it because of what you did." You saved her. He didn't know how he managed to sound accusatory when he felt so pathetically, so indescribably grateful. They all told themselves that death was part of their lives and that they knew it, that they were ready for it, yet it always took them by surprise when death came knocking after all. Sasuke had a very large family and a lot of friends, and nearly all of them were shinobi. He was no stranger to losses, and he would cope badly with most of it. But Sakura? No. There was no way. Sakura was a part of his future. She would be there when he became Hokage, when he started a family if he ever did, when he would cope with other losses. And he would be there when she settled down, when she would go through bliss and grief. It couldn't be another way. Except it very well could. In just the blink of an eye, with just one fight. A future gone forever. Unacceptable. I'm glad she's okay, Naruto said, so tame, so casual, for the beating of her heart he had sustained on his own, for the life he had kept in this world. Sasuke couldn't make sense of it. He couldn't let it go. Why did you do it? Accusing, again. Naruto seemed hurt. I just wanted you to be safe. What, was it so wrong of me? Should I have just let you go on your stupid missions when I couldn't even keep an eye on you? Sasuke didn't say, you could have just stayed, because it wasn't in his nature to be cruel, even when angry, even when hurt. But he thought about it. Thought about answering that yes, he should have done just that if that was how things were going to be. But then again, he kind of had. Since he had lied. Since he had pretended. That's not what I'm saying. Why like this? Why lie? He understood why Naruto would want to make sure, want to do something for them. He knew how unbearable it was, to be so far away, to be helpless, knowing the dangers your friends faced every day. But he afforded himself that comfort without giving them a chance to have it too, and wasn't that selfish? Wasn't that wrong of him? It was the exact same problem as him showing up out of the blue to check on Sasuke after his father's death. Like it was that easy, when Sasuke had been starved for news of any kind for so long. It wasn't fair. What did you want me to say? Sorry, I need you to leave me alone, but I want you to be safe. That's exactly what you should have said. You wouldn't have let it go. Isn't that what we did? Isn't it? Did we chase after you? Did we not leave you alone? After all this time. And you're blaming us for wanting to know? To have news, anything? You could have been dead for all we knew. And that was the first thing you wanted to do? Push us away again? Were those 2 minutes too much already? Didn't I leave you enough alone? Sasuke wiped away frustrated tears, upset with himself for getting so worked up and upset with Naruto too, for always making him feel this way, for how helpless he made him. They never managed to be gentle with each other. Sasuke had been haunted by the thought of their reunion and how badly he wanted to hug his friend, and now they were so tense it felt like they could start throwing punches at any moment. Maybe I couldn't deal with that either. What? Naruto refused to cross his gaze and Sasuke was fed up with this. He wanted peace for them both, even if just for a moment. They could go back to screaming at each other later. For now he took 2 steps forward, determined, because he didn't want to see Naruto like this, distressed and frustrated. This wasn't what he was here for, all he wanted was. Before his hand could land on Naruto's shoulder, a piercing scream tore through the peaceful air of the temple. Naruto's eyes widened in shock, he hunched over himself as if he had been punched, hands clutching his shirt. Above his seal. He took off in a frenzy, running back up to the temple, Sasuke on his heels. There was a commotion in the yard, confusion and disbelief. The scream was from the child, wailing at top volume in the arms of the Kumo Kunoichi. Karen kept asking what the hell is going on. What is it? But no one could answer her until she grabbed Naruto's shoulders and shook him hard, twice, so that he would snap out of his daze and say something. It was another one who eventually answered, an older man with red hair, face folded in an angry scowl. The host of the Hakubi has died. Yujito had never realized before, how Killer Bee was on her mind. It had taken a backseat because she was surrounded by the other Jinchuriki now, their presence much more potent, alive in her thoughts since they were right there. They meditated together, they visited each other's head. She had never shared such a thing with Killer Bee, had never shared much with him at all really. But she was very young when he had been saddled with his own tailed beast. She thought she could remember it, though the memories might not be hers entirely, a new shape, a new soul, so very close to hers. She had hoped for a while that she would get to meet him, that maybe they could be together, that they wouldn't have to face it on their own. But they were from two different worlds. She went through her merciless training alongside her sisters, beaten day after day into submission, into a master of her host that could be mastered in turn, so that she would forever do their bidding. She had ignored Killer Bee as he had ignored her. She had not realized how much he was still there. Until he wasn't. The Haxabi disappeared from their mind. They felt it fade away, forcefully taken out of their world, of this place within their heart where they all seemed to gather. The tailed beast disappeared. And B. Jin started wailing, distressed. Killing any hope Yujito could have had that this was a fluke, that it was just her. It wasn't. The others stumbled into the courtyard, all alarmed and confused, all looking for answers because surely it couldn't be the most obvious one. It couldn't be so easy. It couldn't go this way. It absolutely could, and it had. Killer Bee was dead. The temple descended into chaos, between the Jin hierarchy, in shock and disbelief, in rage and despair, and the others, frustrated and confused, trying to understand what was going on. Karen shook Naruto hard. He was crying. The host of the Haxabi has died, Rashi said. His flat tone was misgiving. Yujito could feel his rage. Karen cursed. Her hands turned gentle on Naruto's shoulders, but already he was shrugging off her grip. Already he was blaming himself. He was so good at that, it was infuriating. Everything was his fault. All blame fell on him. Every single bad thing in this world was somehow imputable to him. She had tried to break him out of it, as gently as she could, but she wasn't very good at comfort and it was rooted deep. He could even blame himself for things that weren't bad. He felt guilty over their life here, over bringing them in, as if it wasn't their choice, as if they followed him blindly. Getting met over it was the only way to stop this spiral, when they accused him of robbing them of their power of determination. But then he felt guilty for that instead. The Konoha boy, Sasuke, hovered a short distance away, clearly wanting to do something, to lay a hand on his friend's shoulder or hold his hand, to offer comfort. He didn't dare, maybe he didn't feel like he had the right, maybe he was embarrassed. Maybe he knew it would be ill-received, which proved he knew the boy well enough. Still, she wished he would anyway. It didn't matter that Naruto didn't want it. It mattered that it was offered. She wished he would, and he did. Sasuke grabbed Naruto's wrist. Naruto pulled out with barely a look, but the boy just grabbed it again. He was unfazed by Naruto's scorching look. He didn't say a word but he didn't let go either, and made clear that he wouldn't. Naruto had to relent. That one wasn't so bad, she thought. The Haxabi was gone. They weren't dead of course, nothing could kill the tailed beasts, it could have been argued that they weren't alive in the first place, not in the sense them humans understood, not in the sense that they could die. But diving in, looking around, it seemed like they didn't disperse like they usually did when their host died. They couldn't find the Bijuu's energy anywhere. Just like that Toby did, it had disappeared entirely from this world. Naruto said, "We need to find them." At the exact same time Yujito said, "We need to lay low." She knew he would go there. Knew he would want to do something, as always. Do something, go somewhere, move, act. He couldn't stay still. He couldn't let anything go. What do you mean? He sounded so offended. Kumo is going to go on the warpath over this. They will blame anyone and everyone, and we can't be caught in the crossfire. They are our best chance at taking down at least part of the Akatsuki, but they won't hesitate to target us too. So we should just do nothing. There is nothing to do. Nothing but protect ourselves. The Eight Tails will be fine and Killer Bee is he's dead. Even you can't go against that. If anything he looked even more offended now. She couldn't tell for sure what the others were thinking, which one would lean more on her side or his, but this wasn't a contest. Ultimately, they had no power to decide how the others lived their life. But they had always managed to come more or less to an agreement until now. Don't you care about his death? The tension ranked up in seconds, both their energy growing and spilling out, taking over the ground. Do not put words in my mouth. She was passingly aware of the others guarding up in turn, of the confusion and grief rising, threatening to swallow them all. A roaring storm, with all the damage it could do. Jin whimpered in Suijutsu's arms. It snapped Yujito back into the present, back in the soft, warm comfort of the temple that she had come to see as her home. Sanctuary for them all, and she would never put that in peril. She made an effort to retreat, to calm down, pushing the beast back, muzzling her grief. She couldn't let herself go like this. Naruto lost some of his hardness. His face softened into confused guilt. I'm sorry. I do not hunger for revenge, she cited without thinking. Only Gaara caught it, judging by how he turned to her with a curious gaze, though of course he didn't say anything. Suna was by far the village where the old faith was the most prevalent, while in Kumo worshippers were rare, and faithful to younger gods. War was a popular one. Love too, a classic. Yujito herself would offer passing prayers to life, but it was so minor it didn't even have a shrine in Kumo. She didn't get it. To her it was the only one worth worshipping. One of her old instructors had been born in Suna. She would repeat those paths like a mantra. Yujito could only ever recall this one, because after what happened to her sisters, the old woman had quoted it at her ad nauseum. When Yujito wailed at her, asked why she wouldn't punish her, why she wouldn't make her pay for their death. I do not hunger for revenge. Eventually, Yujito started to tell it to herself too. So that she wouldn't lose it and turn her rage against her village. Or against herself. But no, never again. She had control, she would keep it tightly. I do not hunger for revenge. I seek justice. Not that she ever got it, for her or her family. Okay, let's all calm down. Karen was the one to step in at last, eyes wide, as wary as if she was approaching wild animals, wondering if they were going to jump at her throat. Yujito hated the worry in her eyes, but could she blame the girl? She had merits to have even stuck with them for so long. Walk away. Do something else. We are done here. They all scattered around in a matter of seconds. Gaara tailed Naruto up to the roof of the temple. Soon Yujito was left alone with the boy from Konoha. She didn't expect him to address her at all. I'm sorry for your loss. She didn't answer, but he didn't seem to expect her to. He went on. I met some people from Kumo recently. There was a woman named Karui. She talked about you. She didn't know how to answer that. There was no question anyway. I'm sorry. She was worried about you. She seemed convinced you would come back, if she could only talk to you. Karui was always set in her way. Things were as she saw them and had to go how she wanted them to. Yujito would lie if she said she didn't miss the girl as well. She and Amwa had been two of the very few people to talk to her at all back in Kumo. Karui would argue it made her luckier than most. She was wrong. That's what I told her. She didn't like it. That pulled a startled laugh out of Yujito, to both their surprise. He was just so out of place here, yet so calm about it. It wasn't exactly resignation, he just took it in stride. Even his attitude toward Naruto was maddening, considering they had been apart for years and that their relationship was rather fraught. The kid seemed to be equipped with infinite patience and indulgence. She didn't exactly like that in someone. She was equally envious and wary. Maybe she also pitied him a little. I'm sorry, I know you don't know me, but I was wondering, would tell me about your people. She thought he was talking about Kumo at first, but then understood that he was referring to the Jinhyuriki and their friends, making do in the busy temple. It pleased her greatly. She didn't ask why he didn't go to Naruto directly. Talking to a stranger was easier sometimes, some truth would hurt less than if it was coming from his friend's mouth. He might not truly wish them to have suffered apart, but it wouldn't be easy to hear he hadn't at all. Though he didn't need to worry about that, Naruto let nothing show, but he suffered plenty. Yeah, sure. They settled on the terrace overlooking the garden. Yujito introduced quietly the ones crossing their paths. They remained ignored for the most part, except by Fu, who sat by them for a while, recounting a few wild anecdotes before going to ask Rashi for some training. Yujito was surprised at her own softness, the fondness unmistakable in her tone even if she tried to remain factual. The boy didn't comment much but he listened intently, split between relief and a form of longing he wouldn't soon be rid of. I was hoping he would be well. She was unsure if his wish had been answered or not. Do you think you are like family? She was caught off guard by the question, and she took her time to think about it. People become friends because they are alike and appreciate each other, they become allies if they have similar goals. But family comes before knowledge, it resists our differences. We might not have become friends, we are very different. But we were bonded to each other long before we met, or even knew of each other. It was funny how they had all believed to be alone. Even she, and Rashi and Han, who had grown up alongside another one of them. Even if the number in their name made it obvious that there were others. But they didn't think of it because it was pointless, they were trapped and chained, and they would remain so. Until Naruto came along. On his own he decided that no, it wouldn't remain so. With his bare hands he would change his fate, their fate. And he had. We are very grateful for him, she said after a moment of hesitation. She didn't want to hurt him, but he had to understand. He sighed. I know, I imagine. I don't. I'm happy for you. I will help, if I can. So selfless, so kind. She didn't envy him. Naruto and Gaara came back down from the roof. She didn't imagine they had done much talking, it wasn't their style. But they brought each other peace in a way no other could, it ran deeper even than their shared fate as Jinhuriki. Let's get started on lunch, Yujito said to distract them all, as it didn't look like they would go anywhere for now with the things they needed to say to each other. They shuffled in obediently, to her great amusement. In many ways they were still children, still wanting for the safety of a household that would be welcoming, still chasing family. It was complicated for her to take on the role of the elder, when she had never been the child herself. But it was healing too. They looked up to her and she even managed to feel worthy of their love. She wouldn't let anything happen to them. They worked efficiently around the large kitchen. The Uchiha boy turned out to be decent at it and he dropped in passing that he had been living with a friend instead of at his parents' house for a few years now, hence the obligatory cooking skills. Naruto was comically obvious in his desire to ask more, to know more, but he remained silent. Stubborn to a fault, maybe shy too, after all this time. Yujito made the effort to question the boy in his stead, though she wasn't great at it either. It was awkward, but not really tense. There was even something hopeful to be found here, she thought. They all gathered around the large table. The affair was always chaotic and messy, regardless of whether or not they were all on speaking terms. It was inevitable with so many people eating at the same time, and they made a point to do it whenever possible. The boy from Konoha seemed uncomfortable and lost, but he weathered it as he seemed to do all things. He excused himself as soon as they were done with a feeble excuse, surely just needing some calm. Naruto watched him go with such longing it was painful to witness. Karen kicked him under the table. What is he doing here, huh? How long will he stay? He was essentially missing in action. It could be argued that they had kidnapped him, which wouldn't be good for their business. Naruto shrugged. Karen kicked him again. Tell him to leave. She had no pity to spare, she was stricter than any of the adults around them. Han pulled her by the shoulder so that she would leave the boy alone. She glared at them all. Someone has to say something, she said, accusing, before storming off. They elected to leave her alone for now. Sasuke felt terrible, being here. It wasn't his place and he felt uncomfortable and unsafe, knowing he was seen as an intruder, maybe even an enemy. Which he was. The place was guarded of course, as they had said. Against all kinds of summons and seals. But Sasuke didn't need to do any summoning. He wandered into the woods, just out of sight, letting his mind wander as his steps carried him among the trees. Sure enough, after some time, Gigi strutted in as well. The cats came and went as they pleased. They rarely obeyed summoning. They would just show up. This place wasn't warded against creatures simply deciding to wander in. Were you worried about me? Sasuke asked the cat, curious as to how he had shown up so quickly. He didn't get an answer of course. In fact, Gigi made a point of ignoring him completely. "Tell them I'm fine, and not to come looking for me. I'll be back soon. I'll try to convince the Jinhuriki to come out of hiding. Don't tell them where we are." He wasn't sure if he was imagining the disapproval in the cat's demeanor and gaze, or if he was just projecting his guilt and unease. Sakura would see straight through him. He couldn't hope to fool her into believing he had his mission at heart, that he was here for any other reason than his own personal feelings. No matter. Gigi wouldn't betray him, and he would go back, soon. He would fight again, soon. But for now, he just needed to find some peace. "We received words from Suzuki. He's fine. Chasing after his boy, you know. Good for him, I guess." Ino barked loud enough that Sakura could hear her the moment she stepped into the lab, with little care for the other shinobi working encryption around them. Knowing she did it on purpose didn't make it any less irritating, on the contrary. Sakura wondered how they could stand working in Ino's space all day long. But then again, they were all a bunch of weirdos, so it wasn't excluded that some were even worse than her. This specific team worked on decoding the most complex messages, mostly snatched from enemies' hands, and they didn't much see the light of the sun. What they called their lab was a large, chaotic room of the intelligence department that no one would set foot into unless absolutely necessary. It was cluttered with desks and chairs piled high with papers, books, notes, pens, and various devices Sakura knew nothing of. It was the first place she had thought of going, after leaving the hospital. She crossed the room, ignoring its other occupants to focus on her friend, as intent as a weapon trying to find its target. One wrong move, one misstep would send her crashing down, shattering into a million pieces. But if she could reach Ino, surely she would be fine. Because the girl looked up as soon as Sakura came near, abandoning her work to come to stand in front of her. "Come on, let's see," she said without preamble, without any coddling or consideration, without any sympathy at all. Uncaring about their, admittedly uncaring in turn, audience, she unbuttoned Sakura's shirt from top to navel and opened it wide. She gave a long, assessing look to her bare chest before declaring, with a pensive voice, yeah. Ugly." At last Sakura found her bearings, at last she could see through the fog and breathe a little easier. Ino pretended that she didn't notice anything amiss, that she wasn't holding tightly at Sakura's arms to make sure she wasn't going to crumble on the spot. But she wasn't, not anymore. Not like she had been so close to, earlier at the hospital, when the nurse had untied her bandages at last, when she could finally assess the damages. Ugly was putting it mildly. Half of her breasts were gone. The scars would fade in time, didn't she know that well? They wouldn't remain so swollen and red. But there was nothing to do about the cave-in, about the canyon dug into her left breast, clipping it at half its original size, uneven and lumpy. There was no going around it, and Ino didn't try to. Didn't offer either comfort or dismissal, didn't say it was nothing, didn't say it was anything. It was ugly, was what it was, and that was all. It wasn't so flagrant with her clothes on, because she never had that much going on there in the first place. But still. The deformity was there, hard to miss. Her body maimed again. Marked, again. It was more than common, of course, she knew it could have been worse. But after the look, it was the shape now, and she wondered what else of herself she would have to relent next, what pieces could be again chipped away. Wondered if anyone but Ino could look at her and say ugly with such disinterest and yet such warmth. She didn't often spare much thought for her future, but she was still sensitive to its shifts and turns. Ino was almost deaf in one ear, since a rocky spying mission in the land of tea. She had a patch of burnt skin at the back of her head and neck where hair wouldn't grow anymore. All of them had been scarred in some way, their bodies reshaped and altered, often becoming painful and gripped like they were in their 50s already. They were not yet 20. "We can go and get wasted if you want. I can't look at this anymore anyway." She was working on the final message left behind by Jiraiya. It had to be of import, or he wouldn't have been careful to encode it so well. They had hope it would help them defeat his killer. Most of the intelligence department was working on it, Ino's father, deep into the consciousness of the corpse Jiraiya had sent back. The analysis team, led by Shizuan, trying to understand the strange state of the body. The whole village was in a kind of stasis, anxiously waiting for the next development, the next attack. They had all retreated back behind their own walls now that the Raikage's brother had been killed, Kyumo calling for an all-out stand already that the other villages were debating answering to. Sakura didn't think they had much of a choice, but they did if they had no care for the losses in places not their own. And that was the case for a lot of people. She just wanted them to put an end to it. Fight and win and be done with it, and go back to their lives, to the improvement they wanted to make, to the work yet to be done. They aimed to build and for now they were stuck trying to prevent more destruction. It was infuriating. They exited the intelligence department firmly decided to go drink their weight in alcohol in one of the ghost houses of the night district, despite the sun still picking above the roofs of the villages. But they stumbled upon none other than clan leader Hinata on the way. "Hey pretty. Were you coming to see me?" Ino asked, full charm on. "Sorry, I should have warned you ahead." "No worries. We were just going to get some sushi for dinner. Come join us." Sakura didn't call her out on the lie. Sushi were Hinata's go-to for any occasion, while Ino wasn't so fond of it. But it wasn't so easy to get the young clan leader to do anything besides work. Catching her out like this was a rare opportunity, one Ino wasn't going to let go to waste. She didn't even wait for an answer, instead hooking a casual arm under Hinata's to stir her toward a somewhat adequate sushi restaurant that wouldn't poke holes in their finances. Hinata would probably offer to pay anyway, but all the more reason not to aim at anything too fancy. Hinata often took the trip to intelligence, to Ino's office. It seemed the one allowance she granted to herself. She went down there and asked for news, for words, for what was going on out there. Sakura wasn't sure she still hoped to hear from her cousin, after all this time and knowing what they knew now. But it had become a habit, one that Ino indulged at great length, desperate that she was to cheer the girl up, however she could. Apart from these brief encounters, Hinata was always at work. She was among the other clan leaders and the high-ranking Jounin, or the council of her clan. She was working diplomacy and trade, she was helping with training and childcare and who knew, probably gardening as well. She never stopped, despite the people around her asking, and then begging her to. She never took time for herself. She never laughed. Or well, never as long as Ino wasn't on a mission to make that statement a lie. After just a few minutes at the restaurant, Sakura was bent in half and holding back tears, unable to resist Ino and her deadpan tone as she recollected with a straight face the wildest tales of the intelligence department. Hinata made no such grand expression, but she too was laughing, face relaxed for once instead of pinched in a sad frown. She even forgot after a while to hide behind her hand, to duck and cover her face. Ino looked incredibly smug. They walked her back to the Hyuga compound afterward. Sakura and Ino were well beyond tipsy, but they were accomplished in this task and did not embarrass themselves too much. Hinata seemed to find it amusing anyway. They watched her disappear beyond the heavy doors of her clan's home. The ones guarding the entrance made no comment, of course, but one of them gave them a small nod that almost felt like approval. How things had changed, and yet not changed at all. "Are you going to do something about that?" Sakura asked once they were out of earshot. She knew Ino as well as herself. Not yet. When then? She had an idea. There was a process to this kind of thing. It couldn't ever be simple. Come on, you know. She's just like Sasuke. She's stuck. It won't go anywhere. Sakura frowned. Maybe they'll have to think about moving on someday. It was a mean thing to say, but they had to say it at some point, right? Some people left and never came back. Some bridges were never mended. Was she supposed to forever look and be silent while Sasuke waited and waited? How was that more noble and brave than deciding to stop, deciding that they were done with this, that they too had the right to get on with their lives? So what if Naruto did come back eventually? Was it so wrong of her to want to get things done in the meantime? It wasn't as if she had a choice. It wasn't as if she could decide to leave it all behind. We still have time, cherry pie. They were not yet 20. You're the one telling me that. No one has to follow their own advice. Last drink at the flat. Ino had invested Shikamaru's room, and Sakura had not yet thought about where she would return to after the hospital. She didn't want to go back to her parents, so she followed Ino to the boys' place. It held a bit of all of them, they were over so often. They knocked back a few glasses before lying facing each other on Ino's bed, eyes shining in the dim light of the street. Ino drew her closer when the tears came. "You are beautiful and I love you." They held on through the night. They didn't know what to do with their grief, with the empty hole in the shape of the Haxabi and its host. They meditated for a while after dinner, but they still couldn't find any trace of them. Eventually they all called it a night, but Naruto couldn't just opt out. Not when Sasuke was hovering at the back door, with no idea what to do with himself. He sat by Naruto's side once they were alone. They looked at the garden and the woods in silence for a moment. I'm very sorry. About your friend. He wasn't my friend." Naruto grimaced at his own tone, at his lack of sympathy and patience, at Sasuke's pinched lips and furrowed brows. "I mean, I never met him. But he was. He was one of us. He should have been with us. You know he didn't even want to." Naruto shrugged. "I know, but I said I would bring us all together. He was one of us, he was ours to look after. Just like any member of the Uchiha clan would be yours, you know? Even if he didn't want our help, even if. They are my responsibilities." He hoped the slip would fly over Sasuke's head, but that was too much to ask. "They're not yours, not solely." "Yes they are." He jumped back on his feet, suddenly restless. He started to pace back and forth under the soft light of the lanterns they had hung all around the roofs to illuminate the courtyard at night. It divided it into two neat worlds, one bright and warm, filled with noises and life, where his family dwelt. And the rest of the world, oppressive in its silence and darkness, yet comforting too in a way, easy to get lost into. He paced the line as if dangling on a rope, one step away from falling on either side. "They're here because of me. I brought them here. You don't understand, I left. I left and I took them away with me, and it has to be worth it, it has to. We can't fail, I can't fail, or what would that all have been for?" They would be furious with him if they heard him talking this way. That was why he wouldn't. Sasuke didn't look convinced either, but Sasuke didn't often choose anger. Instead he got up too. He got closer. With the light in his back, Naruto had a hard time making out the lines of his face, but he thought he could see them clearly anyway. He had not changed all that much. "It's okay. Naruto, it's okay. You did well. Please don't say that. You did. How can you say that to me? After everything. You know, this is why I couldn't face you. I couldn't have handled it either way. I know you ought to be angry with me, but I also knew that most likely. That it would go this way. That you would be kind to me, again, that you would still be missing me. It was too hard to care, if you had known, if I had told you about the seal. I could imagine the look on your face and I couldn't bear it. I didn't deserve that, you shouldn't have." Sasuke hugged him. He hugged him hard, without finesse. There was the anger, maybe, the embrace was bruising tight, suffocating. Naruto sank into it as if he could bring them closer still, as if they could imprint the sharp edges of their bodies into each other, to better fit, to hurt a little more. "Why can't you ever trust me?" Sasuke whispered low, so low it maybe wasn't meant to be heard, and Naruto was too shaken to dare answer. Sasuke went on anyway. "I wanted to see you again, because I missed you. I want you back because I miss you. I want to be where you are. This is what mattered to me. Can't you ask for more?" Naruto wanted to say. "Won't you ask for more?" Couldn't he be angry? Couldn't he demand reparation and apologies? Couldn't he blame him? Sakura would have been easier to deal with. She would have known to punch him in the face and scream herself raw, and he could have screamed right back, get it all out. Sasuke had always been so contained. Compact and sealed, tightly reined in. Cold, some would say, unfeeling. As if. Naruto would forever be grateful to him for letting him go, for allowing him to leave. And yet he wished he hadn't sometimes. Wished Sasuke had asked for something for himself just once, wished he could demand and be granted, wished he could have whatever he wanted. Even the things Naruto was the one keeping from him. I'll need to go back soon, Sasuke said when he stepped back, even if it seemed to be about the last thing he wanted to do. Naruto almost asked, why? Why not stay here? He was sure Sasuke would like that. He would fit well here. There was no point in asking though. Sasuke did what he had to do. He didn't just leave things behind. This little interlude, this escape, it was already huge for him. He had wanted that badly to come to scold Naruto in person. And Naruto, since he was selfish and terrible, couldn't help hoping it could last a little longer. Sasuke had entertained many fantasies about something like this. He dreamed he had followed Naruto out of Konoha. That they had made this life together. Or that he had convinced Naruto to stay and make the best of their situation with him, that he was the one he had moved in with after his fallout with his father. He dreamt of a life they could live side by side. It was still tempting to this day. Of course it wasn't in the realm of possibilities, and he didn't think of it as such. But he could daydream all he wanted, as he witnessed the life around the temple. Daydream about fitting in, about the everyday nonsense they would get up to. The how mattered little, in the end, like the who and the where. He had meant what he said more than he thought, he realized. At the end of the day all he wanted was to be where Naruto was. But he was running out of time and excuses. He had slept terribly on one of the spare futons, plagued with guilt and worry. It had to be rather chaotic back at home. He was needed by his master's side, by his family and teammates. He had indulged enough. That was what he told himself, wondering how to breach the subject of his departure while they finished with breakfast, until one of the people here that wasn't a host, Suijutsu, accosted him out of the blue. "You're a very good healer, aren't you?" Sasuke could only nod. He didn't want to brag, and he assumed they had heard enough if he could make that statement. Suijutsu turned to the rest of the group. "We could take him to the northern hideout." It meant nothing to Sasuke, but it was of great import to the people gathered. Naruto perked up, suddenly excited. Even Karen seemed to see merits in the words. "We have a friend there," the boy went on. "He's been very sick for a long time. He has a rare disease. No one could help." They started to argue about logistics and safety measures while Sasuke looked around, helpless, for support, for backup. For someone to put a stop to the plan, to say it was a terrible idea, that he wasn't meant to be here and needed to leave as soon as possible. No one did, of course. They had little concern for what Sasuke was supposed to be doing, but they were worried for their friends. "It's not too far from here. We can also investigate what Orochimaru has been up to, if he's back to one of the hideouts or if he's still out there with the Akatsuki. It's a good idea." Sasuke wondered who Naruto was trying to convince the most. He didn't need to try too hard anyway. Sasuke didn't need all that much. "Okay. Yeah, okay, let's go. I'll help if I can. Just a little longer." Check the description for the links to the author.